Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Unseen Pursuer, Footsteps Without a Shadow. The forest was a place I had always thought of as my refuge, a patch of wilderness tucked away from the noise and clutter of town. That morning, I set out just after dawn, carrying a small pack with water, some snacks, and my sketchbook. I'd been feeling restless lately, tangled in the routine of my job and the city's relentless pace. The plan was simple: hike the trail, find a spot where the light struck the moss just right, and sketch. Nothing more complicated than that. The air was cool and fresh, the kind that fills your lungs with a sharp clarity. I stepped onto the narrow dirt path, worn smooth by years of footsteps, and immediately heard the familiar crunch of dry leaves beneath my boots. The trail wound through a stand of firs and cedars, their trunks thick and rough with bark. I moved steadily, my pace easy, letting the rhythm of my steps settle into a kind of meditation. After about 20 minutes, the forest began to change. The trees grew sparser, and the ground beneath me shifted from leaves and pine needles to patches of exposed soil and scattered roots. I passed a fork in the trail. The left path led deeper into the thick woods, while the right curved toward a rocky outcrop I liked to sit on when I needed to think. I chose the right, my boots tapping against the hard-packed earth. That's when I first noticed it. A rhythm and the sound of footsteps, not just my own, but another set falling in perfect time beside me. At first, I thought it was someone else on the trail, maybe a hiker keeping pace just out of sight. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see another figure, but there was nothing. The path behind me lay empty, the forest still and silent. I slowed my pace, listening intently. The footsteps continued, matching mine exactly, step for step, heel to toe, never faltering or speeding up. It was impossible. No one could keep pace without revealing themselves, not without breaking the pattern of the trail or making some noise. I stopped completely, heart starting to quicken. The footsteps ceased as well, leaving me in a sudden, eerie quiet. I waited for a full minute, scanning the shadows between the trees, but there was no movement. No one. Just me. And the forest. Trying to shake the unease, I resumed walking, this time deliberately altering my stride. I quickened my step, then slowed, then paused abruptly. The footsteps followed suit, unwavering and exact. It was as if my shadow had come to life and chosen to echo my every move. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I told myself it was a trick of the mind, the forest playing games with my senses. Maybe the sound was bouncing off the trees in a way that created a rhythmic echo. But the clarity of the steps, the definite pattern, didn't feel like an echo. It felt deliberate, calculated. I stopped again and crouched to examine the ground. That's when I saw them, another set of footprints pressed into the muddy earth alongside mine. I expected to find fresh prints, but these were different. The boots were large, their soles worn in a twisted, uneven pattern that suggested heavy use and possibly poor gait. The prints weren't fresh, though. They were dry and cracked, as though left days or even weeks ago. They trailed alongside mine for about 50 feet before disappearing into a thick cluster of shadowed underbrush. I stood up slowly, glancing down the path where the prints vanished. The forest there grew darker, the dense canopy blotting out the morning light. A chill ran down my spine. The thought that someone or something had been here before me, moving silently through the same spaces, was unsettling. But what unsettled me more was the way those footsteps had matched mine just moments ago, perfectly timed, stepping in lockstep with my own pace despite no one being visible. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and tried to steady my breathing. The sun was higher now, filtering through the leaves and casting long, shifting shadows. The forest felt different, less welcoming. I debated turning back, but curiosity gnawed at me. I had to know who had left those prints and why the footsteps had matched mine so precisely. I took a few cautious steps forward, eyes darting between the path ahead and the thick shadows where the prints disappeared. The silence pressed in on me, thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional creak of a branch or the distant call of a crow. My footsteps no longer had a companion. I was alone. Or so I hoped. The forest closed in around me, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes, watching from the edges of the shadows. The faintest rustle, just beyond sight, made me freeze. I told myself it was probably a squirrel or a bird disturbed by my passage, but the thought offered little comfort. That was the moment I realized I was not just walking through the woods, I was walking into something else entirely. Something unseen, deliberate, and patient. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what I might find. A sudden chill crept down my spine as the air grew heavier, thick with anticipation. Every step forward felt measured, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I clenched my fists, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead, whatever had been waiting all along. I didn't sleep well that night. Morning came in a muted gray, the sun struggling to break through a thick layer of cloud. I dressed quickly, grabbing my backpack and the small flashlight I'd brought along. The forest outside was quiet, but the uneasy feeling had settled in my chest like a stone. I knew I had to go back to find out more about those prints and the footsteps that had matched mine. I followed the same trail I'd taken the day before, stepping carefully over roots and fallen leaves. The path narrowed as it wound deeper into the forest, the canopy thickening overhead until only slivers of light pierced through. I scanned the ground for signs, anything that might explain the twisted boot prints. After a few minutes, I spotted them again, faint but unmistakable, pressed into the damp earth just off the trail. The prints seemed older here, the edges softened by rain or time, but the pattern was the same, a heavy, twisted sole, the kind of boot someone might wear for tough terrain or worse, for something less innocent. I crouched down, running my fingers lightly over the imprint. It was deep, suggesting a weighty step, deliberate and sure. As I stood, I realized I wasn't alone again. The faintest sound, a snap of a twig, a shift in the underbrush, made me freeze. My heart sped up, and I strained my ears. Nothing. Just the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching me, following my every movement. I pressed on, keeping my back to the trail and scanning the thick shadows that hugged the trees. The twisted prints continued, leading me off the path and into a tangled thicket. The underbrush was dense here, branches scraping my jacket and tearing at my skin. It wasn't a place meant for casual wandering. Whoever had left these tracks had moved with purpose, knowing the forest well. I spotted something else, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush, faded and torn. I pulled it free, holding it up to the light. It was a fragment of a shirt, the material rough and stained with dirt and something darker. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a hiking mishap or a lost traveler. It felt like evidence. I stuffed the fabric into my pocket and kept moving, the twisted prints leading me toward a small clearing. The air here was colder, heavier, and the shadows seemed to gather like a curtain. At the edge of the clearing, something caught my eye, a makeshift shelter, crudely constructed from branches and tarps, half hidden beneath a canopy of leaves. I approached slowly, every nerve on edge. The shelter was empty, but signs of recent use were clear, discarded cans, a half-burned fire pit, and footprints leading in and out. There was no one in sight, but the place smelled faintly of smoke and sweat. I crouched to examine the ground, heart hammering. The twisted boot prints were everywhere here, circling the clearing and disappearing into the shadows beyond. I followed them with my gaze, noting how they vanished into a narrow ravine that cut through the forest like a scar. A sudden noise, a sharp rustle from the other side of the clearing, made me whirl around. My flashlight beam swept over the trees, catching nothing but flickering leaves. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the edge of the light. I swallowed hard, the weight of the forest pressing in on me. It wasn't just the footprints anymore. It was the certainty that someone was out here, watching, waiting. Someone who knew these woods better than I ever could. I backed away from the shelter slowly, careful not to make a sound. The twisted prints led back toward the path, but I hesitated before following them. The forest felt alive with threats I couldn't see, something human, but dangerous. I had stumbled into a place where I didn't belong, and whatever lurked here had been patient, silent, and waiting for me. As I reached the path, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling hands and saw a message from Emily. "You okay? You sounded weird on the phone last night." I stared at the screen, the trail behind me dark and empty. I wanted to tell her everything, the footsteps, the prints, the shelter, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I typed back, just tired. "I'll call you later." I pocketed the phone and looked back into the forest, where the twisted prints disappeared into shadow. Something told me this was only the beginning. And deep down, I knew I wasn't alone out here, not by a long shot. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, its beam trembling slightly as I stepped forward. The air grew colder, carrying a faint metallic scent that didn't belong to the earthy forest floor. My heart pounded, echoing in the quiet like a warning drum. Every crackle of leaves underfoot sounded too loud, too deliberate. I forced myself to move slower, to listen harder. A soft rustling to my left made me freeze. I swung the light toward the sound, catching just the edge of something dark slipping behind a tree. My breath hitched. Whoever or whatever was out here wasn't waiting to be found. But now, I was committed. I had to know what was lurking beyond those shadows, even if it meant stepping deeper into the unknown. The first rays of dawn filtered weakly through the dense canopy, casting long, pale fingers across the forest floor. I forced myself up, muscles stiff and protesting. The forest felt different in daylight, less threatening, maybe, but no less alien. The twisted boot prints still nagged at the back of my mind, their grotesque shapes etched into the soft earth like a warning. I knew I had to follow them, to understand what I was dealing with before the day slipped away. My flashlight was useless now, so I stuffed it into my pack and pulled out the crumpled map I'd brought. The paper was damp from sweat and dew, but the faded lines of the trails were still visible. The prints had led me off the main path last night, veering sharply west. I steeled myself and headed that way, boots sinking slightly into the mossy ground. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual morning chorus of birds and insects subdued as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Every few steps, I glanced behind me out of habit, half expecting to see those footsteps matching mine again. None came. After about 20 minutes, I came upon a small clearing one I hadn't noticed on any map or satellite image. It was hidden, surrounded by thick brambles and ancient trees leaning inward like sentinels. In the center, a rusting metal barrel lay on its side, half buried in a mound of dirt and dead leaves. The twisted boot prints circled the clearing, then disappeared into the undergrowth beyond. Kneeling beside the barrel, I noticed something odd. Fresh drag marks in the dirt leading away from it, shallow but unmistakable. My pulse quickened. Someone had been here recently. I scanned the surrounding trees, searching for signs, broken branches, disturbed leaves, anything that could tell me more. Then I saw it, a length of frayed rope tangled in the roots of a nearby oak. It was the kind of rope you'd use to tie something or someone. The metallic scent I'd noticed last night seemed stronger here, mixed with a faint, sour tang I couldn't place. I pocketed the rope carefully and moved deeper into the woods, following the drag marks. The air grew heavier, the shadows longer, and the silence more oppressive. My skin prickled with a mixture of fear and determination. I wasn't just an intruder in these woods anymore. I was a witness to something that didn't want to be found. About half a mile beyond the clearing, I stumbled upon a narrow trench, crudely dug and partially hidden by fallen branches. The earth inside was freshly turned, dark and moist. I hesitated, then crouched down, shining my phone's light into the hole. Inside, I saw a rough wooden crate, splintered and cracked, but unmistakably a container. My fingers trembled as I reached inside and lifted a stained canvas tarp from its top. Underneath, there were several bundles of fabric, tightly wrapped and bound with strips of cloth. The metallic scent was strongest here. My breath hitched when I recognized the unmistakable shape of a boot sole pressed into one of the bundles, a boot sole that matched the twisted prints I'd been following. A cold wave of realization swept over me. This wasn't just a game of cat and mouse. Whoever had left those prints had been here before, burying something or someone. I pulled back, heart hammering, and scanned the trees. The footsteps that had haunted me since yesterday were no longer just echoes in my mind. They were warnings. I was in over my head, but turning back didn't feel like an option anymore. Suddenly, a branch snapped sharply behind me. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat, flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. Nothing. Just the empty woods, silent and watching. But then, from the shadows, a voice, low, gravelly, almost a whisper, cut through the stillness. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, every nerve screaming. The footsteps had never really stopped. They'd been waiting for me to find this place all along. And now, whatever was out here was ready to make sure I didn't leave. The voice came again, closer this time, weaving through the trees like a dark thread pulling me deeper into the unknown. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. "Who's there?" I managed to ask, voice barely more than a breath. No answer. Just the rustling of leaves, the subtle shifting of something moving just beyond the edge of the flashlight's reach. I took a cautious step backward, then another, the beam jittering as I fought to keep it steady. "Leave," the voice murmured once more, and now I could hear the rasp of breath, ragged and uneven. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. Panic surged, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I forced myself to look around, searching for any sign of what or who might be stalking me through these woods. Then I saw it, a glimpse of pale skin, barely visible between the gnarled branches, eyes reflecting the faintest glint of moonlight. They watched me, unblinking, waiting. I knew then I had to move fast. Turning, I dashed blindly through the undergrowth, branches clawing at my face and arms. Behind me, the footsteps accelerated, crashing through the brush, relentless. The voice echoed again, fading but never fully gone. "You can't hide." Somewhere ahead, a faint glow promised the edge of the forest, the safety of the open road. Every muscle screamed as I pushed harder, desperate to escape the unseen menace closing in. But deep down, I knew the woods weren't just trees and shadows, they were alive, and they weren't done with me yet. The forest never felt so suffocating as it did that night, the canopy pressing down like a shroud, choking out the moonlight. I didn't know how long I'd been running, but exhaustion clawed at my legs and chest. Somewhere distant at the edge of the forest, a faint glow pulsed, promising escape. My mind fixated on it like a lifeline. Then the footsteps stopped. The sudden silence hit me like a slap. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might burst through my ribs. I slowed, squinting into the darkness, the flashlight beam trembling in my grip. No voice. No rustling. Just the heavy, oppressive quiet that pressed in from every side. I pressed my back against a tree trunk, blinking sweat and tears from my eyes, trying to make sense of what I just heard. The voice, low, gravelly, threatening, was unmistakably human. Someone had been stalking me, following my every step through these woods. But for what purpose? And why the old, twisted boot prints I'd seen earlier, the ones that disappeared into shadow like they belonged to a ghost? My gaze dropped to the ground, and my stomach twisted. There, pressed in the dirt not far from where I stood, were the boot prints again. The same grotesquely misshapen sole, the heel worn jagged, the tread caked in dried mud. They stopped abruptly, vanishing into the darkness as if whoever had made them had stepped off the earth itself. I swallowed hard, the cold sinking deep into my bones. Alone? No, not alone. Someone else was here, watching, waiting. Summoning every ounce of courage, I forced myself to move forward, following the faint glow ahead. The woods seemed to close in tighter, branches snagging my clothes, the underbrush thickening. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the gloom, a man, tall and lean, his face obscured in shadow but unmistakably real. He stepped into the light, his eyes sharp and unblinking, the silhouette of a twisted boot print clear on his worn leather shoe. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice low and steady, the threat now unmistakable. I swallowed my fear, fighting the urge to bolt. "I'm just passing through," I said, voice shaking. "I didn't mean to." He cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Nobody just passes through these woods. Not anymore." His gaze was cold, calculating. I could see the lines of hardship etched into his face, the scars twisting like the prints he left behind. There was something familiar in his stance, the way he moved, careful, deliberate, like a predator who knew this forest better than anyone. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight catching the glint of a knife at his belt. "I'm the one who makes sure no one forgets these woods aren't a playground." A chill ran down my spine. He wasn't just a man, he was the shadow behind those footsteps, the voice in the dark, the reason the tracks stopped where they did. I glanced around, desperate for a way out, but the forest was a cage. The glow I'd seen before the road, the safety was gone, swallowed by the night. "Please," I said, voice barely a whisper. "I don't want trouble. Let me go." He smiled then, and it was a slow, cruel thing. "Trouble's already found you." Without warning, he lunged forward, and I stumbled back, heart pounding like a drum. The knife caught the light for a heartbeat, then was gone as he closed the distance between us. I twisted, legs burning, and ran deeper into the dark, into the unknown. Behind me, the footsteps resumed, relentless and unyielding, matching mine step for step. And then I heard it, a second voice, low and gravelly, but different this time. Another man? Or had I just imagined it? "You can't hide." My breath caught. There was more than one of them. The forest wasn't just alive with shadows. It was a trap. And I was caught in the middle. Branches whipped at my face, tearing at my clothes as I pushed harder, lungs burning with every desperate inhale. The moonlight filtered weakly through the canopy, casting eerie patterns that danced with my shadows, but none offered refuge. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Two dark figures were closing in, their silhouettes merging with the night, relentless and unyielding as fate itself. Fear clawed at my chest, but I forced my legs to move faster, dodging roots and fallen logs, heart slamming against my ribs like a frantic drum. The voices behind me had multiplied, now a chorus of menace in the suffocating stillness. "You can't hide," echoed again, this time accompanied by a cruel chuckle that sent a shiver down my spine. My mind raced for a plan, any plan, but the forest seemed endless, a labyrinth with no exit. Then, through the chaos, a faint glimmer caught my eye, a narrow path veering sharply to the right, almost hidden beneath thick underbrush. Instinct screamed at me to take it. I plunged into the thicket, branches scratching at my skin, but it was a gamble I had to take. The footsteps behind faltered for a moment, confusion rippling through the darkness. Then the pursuit resumed, but now only one shadow pressed after me. Panting, I ducked behind a gnarled tree trunk, pressing my back to its rough bark. Silence enveloped me, broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant hoot of an owl. The other voice, the second pursuer, had split away, searching elsewhere. Was this what I wanted, or a deadly trap? Minutes stretched, each second a lifetime. I strained to listen, every nerve taut. Then, faint and almost indiscernible, a twig snapped, a warning that I wasn't alone. The remaining figure was close, too close. I clenched my fists, ready to fight, but then a soft whisper brushed my ear. Over here. It was neither threat nor enemy, but the tiniest thread of hope weaving through the suffocating darkness. With nothing left to lose, I followed the voice into deeper shadows, not knowing if salvation or doom awaited me there. The voice that had whispered over here was barely more than a breath, but it was enough to pull me out of the paralysis that had gripped me. Slowly, I moved toward the source, the rough bark scraping my palms as I edged around the trunk. A figure emerged, thin, lithe, with a cap pulled low over his face. His eyes, sharp and alert, flicked toward me and then back into the shadows. He wasn't one of the two that had chased me. He was something else. "Quiet," he said, voice low and urgent. "They're still out there." My throat was raw, my body trembling, but I nodded. There was no choice now but to trust him. "Follow me," he whispered, stepping lightly over the fallen leaves. We moved swiftly, silently, his footsteps never quite matching mine, but close enough that my heart steadied. After what felt like hours, we emerged into a small clearing. Moonlight spilled over a shallow pit, half covered by branches and leaves. Inside, a twisted boot print was clearly visible, the same as the ones I'd seen earlier, gnarled and worn. "They're tracking you," he said, crouching beside the pit. "These boots belong to a man named Harlan. He's been hunting through these woods for years. Not for game, but for people." The words hit me like a cold wave. "Hunting people?" He nodded grimly. "He's a predator. Thinks of the forest as his kingdom. We call him the Ghost because he's never caught, never seen, just heard. And those boot prints? His signature. He's marking the trail, waiting for his prey to slip." I swallowed hard. "Why me? Why now?" The man looked away, eyes narrowing. "Because you stumbled onto his path. Because he's looking for something, someone. Maybe you know more than you think." The weight of that settled over me. I thought of the past few days, the strange echoes, the feeling of being watched, the footsteps that never fell behind or surged ahead. It wasn't just paranoia. It was real. It had been real all along. "What do we do?" I asked. He stood, extending a hand. "We end this. Tonight." I hesitated but took it. For the first time since I'd entered this forest, I felt a flicker of resolve. I wasn't going to run anymore. We moved back into the trees, deeper into the darkness. The silence was oppressive, the shadows thickening around us. Every crunch of leaves underfoot was a reminder of the danger lurking just beyond sight. The man, whose name I learned was Caleb, led me to a fallen log balanced over a shallow ravine. "Here," he whispered, crouching low. "Harlan uses this spot. His camp is just beyond. If we're careful, we can catch him off guard." My heart pounded in my ears, but something inside me steadied. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something sharper: anger, determination. I wasn't a victim. Not anymore. We crept forward, shadows among shadows. Then, suddenly, a light flickered ahead, a small fire, the orange glow cutting through the black. Voices murmured low and rough. I recognized one instantly, cruel and mocking, the voice of Harlan. Caleb's grip tightened on my arm. "Stay close. Wait for my signal." The minutes dragged as we watched the camp, two figures seated near the fire, boots stretched out, laughter echoing faintly. I noticed the twisted boot prints again, pressed deep into the dirt near the fire pit. They were fresh. Then Caleb moved, quick and silent, snatching a heavy branch. He struck the nearest figure, a grunt of surprise breaking the night. Chaos erupted. I froze for a moment, then acted on instinct. I grabbed a rock and hurled it at the second man. He turned sharply, eyes wild, but Caleb was already on him, forcing him back toward the ravine. The fight was brutal and raw. The sounds, grunts, thuds, the snap of branches filled the clearing. Fear surged, but so did something fiercer, survival. When it ended, both men lay still, groaning but alive. Caleb glanced at me, expression grim but relieved. "We need to leave before they recover," he said. "And before Harlan's other traps catch us." We moved quickly, shadows slipping away from the firelight, retracing our steps through the dense forest. The oppressive feeling that had weighed on me lifted slowly, replaced by a wary hope. By dawn, we reached the edge of the woods, the first pale light brushing the horizon. Caleb paused, looking back into the dark thicket behind us. "You're safe now," he said. "But you'll never be the same. This forest changes people." I nodded, feeling the truth of that deep in my bones. I had come in terrified and hunted. Now, I was scarred but standing. The experience had stripped away the last of my illusions, the belief that the world was safe, that I could outrun danger. But it had also given me something unexpected, a fierce clarity, a hard-earned strength. As I stepped into the clearing beyond, I looked back once more. The twisted boot prints ended here, swallowed by shadows. The footsteps that had matched mine were gone. I was alone, but I was no longer lost. Weeks later, I found myself sitting by a window, the forest still visible in the distance, its edges softened by morning mist. The memory of that night was a shadow that lingered, not a haunting, but a reminder. I had started telling my story to others, not to frighten them, but to warn them. To make sure no one else walked blindly into those woods, thinking they were safe. I wasn't the same person who had entered the forest that night. Fear had carved its mark, but it had also taught me resilience. I had faced the darkness, real, human darkness, and come through. And though the weight of what I'd seen and felt would never fully lift, I had found a fragile peace in knowing that sometimes the greatest horror isn't what lurks in the shadows, but what walks just beside you, matching every step. But this time, I was ready. Story 2, Digital Deceit, Stalked Through Screens. I never thought much about my online life. It was late on a Thursday evening when the first odd thing happened. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through messages from my dating app. For the past few weeks, I'd been talking to a guy named Lucas. He was kind, funny, and seemed genuinely interested. We'd never met in person, but his texts felt warm, like a real connection in a world that often felt distant. I was cautiously optimistic. That night, I noticed something strange. Lucas's profile picture had changed. Not dramatically, but the lighting was different, and the background was unfamiliar. I thought maybe he'd updated it. People did that sometimes. But when I tried to message him, the app glitched. The message wouldn't send. I refreshed the page, and his profile was gone entirely. No trace. I frowned and closed the laptop, telling myself it was probably a technical hiccup. Maybe he deleted his account. Still, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. The next day at work, I mentioned it to my coworker, Jenna. She was the kind of person who admired the drama of social media, always up to date on the latest online gossip. Maybe he was a catfish, she said, half joking but with a hint of seriousness. You know, someone pretending to be someone else. I laughed it off. Could be. But I don't think so. Lucas had been consistent, never asked for money or anything weird. Besides, I wasn't naive enough to fall for some random stranger online. Or so I thought. That evening, I logged into my email and froze. There was a new message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "We need to talk about Lucas." My heart pounded as I clicked it open. The email was brief, no signature, but the words rattled me. He's not who he says. And he's been watching you. I stared at the screen, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. Watching me? What did that even mean? I tried to reply, but the email bounced back. I refreshed my inbox, searching for more messages, but there was nothing else. For the next few days, I found myself looking over my shoulder more often, the feeling of being watched creeping into the edges of my thoughts. My phone buzzed with unknown numbers calling once or twice, but when I answered, there was only silence. No one spoke. I told myself it was paranoia. Maybe someone had sent that email as a prank. But the unease lingered, growing heavier each day. Then, last night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something else. My laptop had been on when I left the apartment, but now it was shut down. I never shut it down unless I planned to be away for a while. And the login screen showed a faint smudge where my finger would have rested on the trackpad. I hadn't touched it since that morning. I called Jenna, voice trembling more than I wanted. I think someone's been in my computer. Did you check for malware or anything? She asked, concern creeping in. I don't know how. But someone was definitely there. Maybe that guy Lucas or whoever he really was. Jenna promised to help me look into it, but I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. My sense of safety, both online and off, was unraveling. And I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went. Before I could even process what was happening, my phone lit up with a notification from a social media account I hadn't recognized. It was a video, grainy, shaky footage of a street corner near my apartment, timestamped just minutes ago. In the video, a figure with a hood stood in the shadows, holding something that looked like a knife. The camera shifted, catching a glimpse of a woman running, screaming. The screen blurred, and then the video ended. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. Below the video, the caption read, "Look closer. This is you." I dropped the phone onto the bed, heart hammering. My world, once steady and safe, was cracking in places I couldn't see. And whatever was coming next, I wasn't ready for it. But there was no turning back now. I forced myself to sit up, blinking away the cold sweat that had formed on my skin. The room felt suddenly colder, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. Questions raced through my mind. Who had sent the video? How did they know about me? Most terrifyingly, what did they want? My phone buzzed again. A message this time, no video, just a single line. "You're closer than you think." I swallowed hard, fingers hovering over the screen. Every instinct screamed to delete it, to disconnect, to pretend none of this was real. But deep down, I knew ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. I reached for the laptop on the desk and typed the file name from the video into a search engine. Nothing. It was as if the footage had been created solely for me, a private message wrapped in static and fear. The door creaked open softly. I snapped my head toward the sound, heart pounding. No one. Just the empty hallway beyond, silent except for the hum of the old building's heating system. I stood, muscles tense, and moved toward the window. Outside, the city buzzed with normalcy, car horns, distant laughter, neon signs flickering. But inside me, everything was unraveling. I needed answers. And I needed them before whatever was coming found me again. The next morning, I woke with a tightness in my chest that no amount of coffee could shake. I forced myself out of bed and pulled on jeans and a sweater, then sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop. The screen glared back at me, accusing and inscrutable. I knew I had to start somewhere. I opened a fresh browser tab and logged into my primary social media account. The messages from the anonymous sender were gone. I checked the notifications and messages again, heart sinking when I found an unfamiliar email address had sent me a friend request. The profile was sparse, no posts, no friends in common, a single profile picture that was just a blurry silhouette. I hesitated but accepted the request. Part of me wanted to confront whoever was behind this, the other part screamed to disconnect and pretend none of it mattered. I opened a new private chat window and typed, "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply came almost immediately. "Look at this." Attached was a link to a news article. My fingers trembled as I clicked it open. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. Local woman arrested in stabbing incident near downtown. The photo beneath the title was unmistakable. It was me. My face, caught in a grainy security camera still, eyes wide with shock as someone else stood over me, a knife glinting in their hand. I blinked, rereading the caption beneath the photo. Suspect identified as Emily Harper, 27, accused of stabbing a passerby after a dispute. My pulse quickened, confusion swirling into panic. I hadn't left my apartment after midnight. I certainly hadn't attacked anyone. The story was wrong. It had to be. I closed my laptop and paced the small living room, trying to piece it together. Had someone stolen my identity? Was this some sick joke? Or worse, was it a setup? The phone rang, and I jumped. I hadn't recognized the number, but I answered anyway. Emily Harper? The voice was low, controlled, almost clinical. You need to be very careful. The evidence is mounting against you. It's only a matter of time before the police come knocking. I swallowed hard. Who is this? Why are you doing this? A faint, cold chuckle. You should be asking yourself why you don't know me yet. I've been watching for a long time. It's all connected. You just don't see it. The line went dead. I sank into the chair, hands shaking. This wasn't random. Whoever this was had planned this carefully, tracking me, learning my habits, my routines. But why? Desperate for answers, I reached out to Nate. He was the only person I trusted enough to share this nightmare with. I typed out a quick message, "Something's wrong. I'm being framed. Can we meet?" He replied almost immediately, "Meet me at the cafe on 5th in 30 minutes. I grabbed my coat and left the apartment, the city's usual noise feeling distant and threatening. At the cafe, Nate was already there, sipping black coffee and looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "I saw the article," he said quietly when I sat down. "This is bad, Emily. Really bad. I don't understand how this could happen. I didn't do any of it. Someone's stealing my identity, setting me up." My voice cracked. "I don't know what to do." Nate nodded. "We need to start documenting everything. Save all messages, videos, emails. This person is trying to break you down, but we can fight back with evidence." I pulled out my phone and showed him the latest messages from the anonymous sender, the video, the link to the news article. He frowned. "This is more than harassment. Whoever this is, they're organized." You should consider reporting this to the police. I'm scared they won't believe me, I admitted. Especially with that article out there. Nate reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We'll figure it out. But first, you need to beef up your security. Change all your passwords, enable two-factor authentication. And be careful about what you post online. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle on me like a shield and a burden all at once. Back in my apartment that evening, I spent hours changing passwords and scanning my devices for malware. Every notification that popped up made me jump. The city outside darkened, and the quiet was a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside me. As midnight approached, I finally allowed myself to breathe, leaning back in my chair. Then my phone buzzed. Another message from the anonymous account. You're not just Emily Harper. You're everything I need you to be. The words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about framing me for a crime anymore. This was about control. I wanted to delete the account, block the number, run away from it all. But something told me I couldn't. Not yet. Because the next message included a photo. One I hadn't seen before. It was a picture of my apartment building, taken from across the street. And in the foreground, standing in the shadows, was the hooded figure from the video. My breath caught in my throat. They were closer than I thought. Much closer. The screen went dark. And then the power in my apartment cut out, plunging me into silence. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, heart pounding as I scanned the dark room. The power didn't come back on for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, a dull hum of electricity returned, flickering the overhead light before stabilizing. I exhaled sharply, relief and fear knotting in my chest. The screen was still black, the photo had vanished. Had it been a glitch? No, the message had been real. Someone was watching me. I called Nate immediately. It rang twice before he answered, voice thick with concern. You okay? The blackout. I was about to come over. I'm fine, I lied. But someone's outside. Someone's been watching me. I don't know what they want. Did you tell the landlord? Maybe the building's having electrical problems. I did. He said it was just a blown fuse in the basement. But that photo, the guy in the shadows, is real, Nate. I saw it. There was a silence on the other end. Emily, listen. We need to take this seriously. You can't stay alone tonight. Let me come over. I hesitated. Inviting Nate over felt safe, but it also felt like admitting how vulnerable I'd become. Still, I needed him. Okay. Please. While waiting, I tried to shake off the creeping paranoia. I scoured my apartment again, checking every door and window. Locked tight. I even pulled the curtain shut, though I knew the figure outside hadn't stepped inside yet. My phone buzzed once more. I froze. It was another message from the anonymous account. This time, just 3 words. I know you're home. I swallowed hard and locked my phone. Nate arrived 20 minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an earnest look that made my chest ache with gratitude. Let's figure this out together, he said, sitting beside me on the couch. We spent the next hour piecing through every message, every link, every video. Nate suggested tracing the IP addresses, but the messages came through encrypted apps, disguised through VPNs. Whoever this person was, they knew how to cover their tracks. Maybe it's someone you know, Nate offered cautiously. Someone who's angry or obsessed. I shook my head. I don't have enemies. At least, not like this. Could it be that guy from the dating app? The one you told me about? I thought of Lucas, the charming stranger whose profile had seemed too good to be true but had drawn me in nonetheless. Maybe. But why? And how did they get all this personal info? My address, my schedule. Nate rubbed his chin. They must have hacked into your accounts. Or maybe they stole your identity before you even knew. The idea chilled me. It wasn't just harassment anymore, it was meticulous, invasive. Someone had dismantled my life piece by piece. Suddenly, Nate's phone vibrated. He glanced down and frowned. Hold on. He opened a news alert on his phone. Emily, they're reporting another attack. Someone was assaulted downtown last night, the same description as the one in that article about you. My heart stopped. Wait, Nate said. This isn't random. They're framing you. But the victim, she's alive. The police have pictures, witnesses. My mind raced. I had to know more. We found the police blotter online. The victim's name was Sarah Miller. The attack had happened 2 blocks from my apartment, in the exact time window I was supposed to have been home. The authorities had released surveillance footage from a street camera, a shadowy figure, hooded, moving quickly away from the scene. I stared at the grainy image. The figure's build was similar to mine. The way they walked. The jacket. My breath caught. That was me. Or at least, that's what they wanted people to believe. Nate looked at me with growing alarm. Emily, this is beyond scary. You need a lawyer. I bit my lip, trying to steady my shaking hands. I can't just sit and wait for the police to come knocking. I have to prove I wasn't there. Do you have anyone who can vouch for you? Where were you at that time? I was home, I said, voice barely above a whisper. I was changing passwords. I wasn't out. Nate nodded. We'll get your phone records, your internet logs. Anything to show you were inside. But even as I said it, a cold thought crept in. What if the person watching me had hacked into my devices so deeply they could fake all of it? Could they make it look like I was somewhere I wasn't? I shoved the thought away. I had to believe there was a way out. The next morning, I woke to a pounding at my door. My heart leapt into my throat. Nate wasn't here yet. I scrambled to the peephole. 2 police officers stood in the hallway. I slid the chain across, trying to keep calm. Emily Harper, one asked, his tone official but not unkind. Yes, I said, voice trembling. We need to ask you some questions regarding an incident downtown last night. Time slowed. This was it. The moment I'd feared, when the nightmare would swallow me whole. I swallowed hard and nodded. Of course. As I unlocked the door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down. A new message flashed on the screen. Look outside. I swung the door open wider, and my gaze darted down the hallway. There, standing in the shadows just beyond the stairwell, was the hooded figure. Not a stranger, but someone I never expected to see again. Lucas. My chest tightened. The game had changed. And I was trapped. The officers waited patiently in the hallway, their eyes flicking between me and the shadowed figure lurking just beyond the stairwell. Emily, one officer said again, voice softer this time. We just want to ask some questions. It's about the incident last night. I nodded, forcing myself to step back and let them inside. The hallway felt colder now, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead making everything seem sharper, more real. Lucas didn't move. He didn't speak. Just stood there, the hood pulled low over his face, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. But I could feel his eyes on me, cold and heavy as iron. "Is he?" I began, gesturing toward Lucas. The second officer glanced at him, then back at me. "We don't know who that is." A lie, I was sure. Lucas had always been careful, always just out of reach, but now he'd slipped into my world where the police could see him. Why? What did he want? I glanced at my phone. The message from before still flashed on the screen. "Look outside." My breath caught again. Someone sent me that message," I said quickly. "Before you knocked." The first officer frowned. "You know who it is." "No," I lied. "But I think it's related to the case. Someone trying to intimidate me." Lucas shifted slightly, stepping forward just enough to reveal a glimpse of his face. Pale, with dark circles under his eyes. The same face I'd known, trusted, even loved before everything fell apart. Before I realized he was the one pulling the strings behind the screen. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. "Emily," Nate's voice came suddenly from behind me. He'd arrived. Relief washed over me, but it was drowned out by the electric tension in the room. Nate's eyes locked on Lucas. "What the hell are you doing here?" Lucas's gaze flicked to Nate, then back to me. "I'm here because you're making a mistake." "Stay back," I said, stepping between Nate and Lucas. My heart pounded like a drum in my ears. "I don't want to hear it." Lucas's features twisted into something like a sad smile. "You don't understand, Emily. You never did." The officers moved closer, hands resting near their belts. Lucas raised a hand slowly, not in threat, but in warning. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said. "I just want to explain. Before it's too late." I shook my head, disbelief and fear tangled inside me. "You framed me. You stole my identity. You've been watching me, manipulating everything. How can I believe anything you say?" "Because I'm the only one who can prove you're innocent," Lucas said quietly. "There's more to this than you know. Someone else is involved, someone who's been using me as much as I've been using you." Nate narrowed his eyes. "Why should we trust him?" "Because if you don't," Lucas said, "they'll come after you next." "You already saw the video, right?" "That wasn't me or you. It was a setup. But it's bigger than just us." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I wanted to scream that I didn't believe him, that he was just another liar, but a sliver of doubt crept in. The way he spoke, the urgency in his voice, it felt real. "Who?" I asked, voice barely audible. Lucas hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "This has everything. Evidence. Names. Dates. Proof that you're being framed by someone with access to everything, your accounts, your life." The officers exchanged a glance. One took a step forward. "We'll need to see that, of course. But Emily, you need to come down to the station with us." "No," I said firmly. "Not yet." Lucas stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "They can't protect you like this. Not with what's coming." "What do you mean?" I asked, panic rising. He looked over his shoulder toward the stairwell, where the shadows seemed deeper now, as if something waited just out of sight. "Because they're watching us, Emily. And they won't stop until you're silenced." Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently, plunging the hallway into sudden darkness for a heartbeat before buzzing back to life. The moment shattered like glass. In that flicker of shadow, I thought I saw movement, a figure darting past the stairwell's edge, too quick, too deliberate. "Did you see that?" I whispered, clutching Nate's arm. The officers drew their flashlights, sweeping the hallway. "No sign of anyone," one said, voice tense. Lucas's eyes narrowed. "They're close. Too close." The first officer pulled out his radio, speaking rapidly into it. "We need backup. Possible suspect in the building." I felt numb. The nightmare had just turned into a trap. And now, with Lucas here, with the police watching, I was caught in the middle of something I couldn't control. Nate leaned toward me. "We have to get out of here." I shook my head. "No. I need to know what's on that drive. If it's real, it's the only way to clear my name." Lucas held out the USB again, his hand steady now. "Take it. But be careful. Once you plug this in, there's no going back." I glanced at the officers, then back at Lucas. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I took the drive from him. Just then, my phone buzzed again. A new message. "They're inside." The hallway felt deathly silent. And in that silence, I realized the hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The morning light was a pale thing, struggling through the blinds like it didn't want to be there. I wasn't sure if I was waiting for salvation or the final blow. The drive's contents had consumed every worry I had since Lucas handed it over. I'd barely slept, piecing together bits of encrypted files and scattered chat logs, all pointing to one undeniable truth. The person who'd stolen my identity, who'd framed me for that brutal attack, had been living just a few clicks away, hovering in my digital shadow. Every message I had sent, every picture I had posted, every private conversation had been weaponized against me. But the files on the drive did more than prove that. They showed me the twisted obsession, the stalking, the lies. There wasn't some faceless entity, it was one person. And that person's real name was buried beneath layers of false profiles and VPNs. I still couldn't believe I'd fallen for it. For him. For them. The pounding on my door startled me out of my spiraling thoughts. I froze, breath caught in my throat. Then, slow and deliberate, the knock came again. "Emily?" "It's me. Nate." Relief crashed over me like a wave. I opened the door to find him there, looking exhausted but determined. "I have good news," he said, stepping inside. "Please, tell me." He pulled out his phone, swiping through messages and emails. "The evidence on this drive, it's enough. Enough for the police to reopen the case, to clear your name formally. And more than that, they've identified the real culprit." I blinked, the weight in my chest loosening just a fraction. "Who?" My voice was barely a whisper. Nate hesitated, then said, "A guy named Michael Harris. He's been linked to multiple identity theft cases, cyberstalking, and fraud. Turns out, he was using your photos and details to create a fake profile for months. He even went so far as to stalk your social media, your habits, your movements. He knew you better than most people." I swallowed hard. Michael Harris. The name felt like a scar. "And he's been arrested," Nate added. "A warrant was issued last night. The police found him at his apartment, along with all the equipment he used to monitor you. Cameras, hacked accounts, everything. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to peace. The person who had shattered my life was finally out of reach. But peace wasn't going to erase the damage. I sat back down, eyes fixed on the USB drive. "What happens now?" Nate sighed. "Now, you rebuild. You get your life back. But it's going to take time. You'll have to give statements, maybe testify. And the emotional toll, it won't just disappear overnight. I nodded, knowing he was right. The chaos of the past weeks had left me fractured, uncertain. A knock at the door interrupted us again. This time, it was a detective I recognized from the station. "Emily, can we talk?" she asked gently. I motioned her inside. She sat across from me, her eyes kind but serious. "We've reviewed everything you provided. With the new evidence, the charges against you will be dropped immediately. We're also looking into the harassment and stalking charges against Harris." She paused, then added, "But Emily, I want to be honest. Cases like this, they leave marks. On your reputation, your sense of safety. It's normal to feel vulnerable, even after it's over." Her words echoed what I'd been feeling but hadn't voiced. "I'm ready to face it," I said quietly. "I have to be." She smiled softly. "That's good to hear. And we'll be here to support you. You're not alone." After she left, I sat with Nate, the morning sun finally breaking through the gray clouds outside. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future beyond this nightmare. Lucas never came back, and I never saw him again. I wasn't sure if he had disappeared or if he was part of the police's covert operation, but I stopped questioning it. My focus was on healing, on reclaiming the pieces of myself that had been stolen. In the days that followed, I changed my online presence completely. New usernames, stricter privacy settings, no more sharing details I didn't want the world to know. I learned to be cautious, guarded, but not afraid. It wasn't easy. Every notification sounded like a warning, every unexpected message brought back the fear. But slowly, I rebuilt trust in myself and the world around me. One afternoon, sitting in a quiet cafe, Nate handed me a small notebook. "For you," he said. "To write down everything. Your story, your feelings. Whatever you need." I smiled, a real one this time. Writing became my armor. Putting words on the page helped me claim my story away from the lies that had tried to define me. I realized that the horror hadn't just been about the crime or the stalking, it was about losing control. About being invisible yet exposed all at once. Now, I was taking control back. The scars would remain, but they wouldn't rule me. I was no longer just a victim. I was a survivor. And in that, I found a strength I never knew I had. As I closed the notebook that evening, I felt the weight lift a little more. The nightmare was over. But the story was mine to tell. I would write it with quiet defiance, in my own voice. Story 3, Hidden Lens, Roommate's Secret Surveillance. When I signed the lease for the apartment, I thought it was just another step toward getting my life back on track. I met my roommate, Tim, on the day I moved in. He was already unpacking boxes in the living room when I arrived, headphones around his neck, looking up with a polite smile. Tall, lanky, with a mop of curly hair that somehow made him look younger than his late 20s, he shook my hand firmly. "Hey, I'm Tim. Let me know if you need help with anything." I nodded, grateful for the offer and relieved to have someone friendly around. Tim worked nights at a local bookstore, he told me, and mostly kept to himself. Quiet was exactly what I needed. The first few days passed without incident. We exchanged greetings in the mornings and evenings, shared the occasional meal, and otherwise kept our distances. Tim was polite but reserved, never prying or oversharing. I liked the routine, the predictable rhythm of my new life: work, gym, home, sleep. The apartment felt like a refuge from the chaos that had swallowed me whole over the past year. But then, little things started to unsettle me. At first, it was nothing. I'd find the living room light on when I was sure I'd switched it off, or Tim would be sitting silently in the kitchen even though I hadn't heard him come in. Once, I caught him standing just outside my bedroom door, his expression unreadable, before he quickly moved away when I looked up. I told myself I was imagining things, or that maybe his years of working nights had warped his sense of time. One evening, I returned from work later than usual. The apartment was unusually cold, the air stale. I dropped my bag by the door and noticed the bedroom door cracked open. I never left it like that. As I pushed it fully open, I saw Tim sitting on the edge of my bed, fiddling with something in his hands. His eyes darted to me, startled. "Hey," he said quickly. "I was just checking the smoke detector. Thought it was beeping last night." I frowned but nodded. "Okay." The explanation felt thin, but I let it slide, chalking it up to the awkwardness of new roommates. Still, I made a mental note to lock my door from then on. A few days later, I went out for groceries, leaving the apartment empty for maybe an hour. When I came back, the place looked the same, but I couldn't shake this feeling like someone had been watching me, waiting. I brushed it off again, blaming it on stress or paranoia. It wasn't until the weekend that the real unease settled in. I was cleaning my room, moving my dresser to vacuum beneath it when my fingers brushed something cold and hard wedged behind the furniture. Pulling it out, my heart skipped. It was a small camera, no bigger than a pack of gum, with a lens staring blankly back at me. The battery was dead, but the lens gleamed in the afternoon light. I stared at it, disbelief freezing me in place. What was it doing there? How long had it been there? Most importantly, who had put it there? My eyes snapped to the bedroom door. I hadn't heard anyone enter. Then, a sudden noise in the living room made me freeze, soft footsteps, deliberate and slow. "Tim?" I called out, voice trembling. No answer. I crept toward the doorway, heart hammering in my chest. The living room was empty. But then I spotted him, just beyond the curtains, peeking out the window. His eyes locked on mine, calm but unreadable. For a moment, I thought about calling out, but something in his gaze stopped me. He stepped back, disappearing from view. I closed the curtains and locked the bedroom door, the camera clenched tightly in my hand. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak, every whisper of wind felt like a threat. I kept picturing those unblinking lenses hidden in my sanctuary, watching, waiting. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe Tim was just eccentric. But deep down, I knew this was no ordinary quirk. And I was already trapped in a nightmare I hadn't seen coming. The next morning, the sun filtered weakly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the camera as if it might explode into motion. My phone buzzed an unknown number. Hesitating, I answered. "Don't trust him," a distorted voice whispered before the line went dead. My heart pounded. Who was watching me? And why? I needed answers. Gripping the camera, I slipped out of the apartment, careful to avoid the street-facing windows. The hallway felt narrower than usual, every footstep echoing louder than it should. I debated calling the police, but feared that without proof, I'd sound paranoid. Instead, I decided to confront Tim directly. Outside his door, I steeled myself and knocked. No answer. I tried again, harder. Still silence. Suddenly, a faint click from inside, the sound of a lock turning. The door creaked open, revealing Tim's pale face, eyes shadowed and unreadable. "What do you want?" he asked flatly. "I know about the cameras," I said, forcing calm. "Why are you watching me?" He said nothing at first, then finally, "Because you're part of something bigger, whether you realize it or not. And they need to know." My mind reeled. Who? What they? Tim's gaze flickered with something unreadable fear, maybe regret. "Not here," he whispered. "Meet me tonight. Midnight. The old warehouse by the docks." Before I could respond, he shut the door, leaving me with more questions than answers, and the growing certainty that the nightmare was only beginning. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the silence that filled the room like a warning. I stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding, the weight of Tim's words pressing down on me. Part of something bigger. Who was he even talking about? And why did they need to know about me? I sank down onto the cracked leather couch, the worn cushions groaning under my weight. The old apartment felt colder suddenly, shadows pooling in the corners as if waiting. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:17 p.m. Midnight still felt so far away, yet the dread settled deep in my stomach like a stone. My phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table. I snatched it up, hoping for a message from Tim, but it was just a spam alert. No way he'd text me from wherever he'd disappeared to. I thought about calling him, but what would I even say? "Hey." I decided to start with what I could control. If Tim had been stalking me, there had to be more cameras, more evidence hidden in plain sight. I grabbed the small screwdriver I'd found in the junk drawer, the one I'd originally used to pry the camera loose from the vent in my room. I moved methodically through the apartment, checking every nook and cranny. Behind smoke detectors, inside lampshades, tucked beneath the bookshelf. Nothing. At first. Then, in the living room, tucked behind a thick curtain near the ceiling, I spotted it, a tiny black lens, barely visible. My heart slammed against my ribs as I carefully pried it out. The wiring was neat, professional. This wasn't some amateur's obsession, this was calculated, deliberate. I stared at the camera for a long moment, then checked the hallway. One of the smoke detectors there felt heavier than the others. I unscrewed it, revealing another lens staring blankly back at me. I felt like I was unraveling a web I didn't know I was caught in. And yet, as disturbing as it was, the worst part was realizing how much of my life Tim had already seen. I brought the cameras to my room, lining them up on the desk like trophies of betrayal. I wanted to call the police, but something held me back. What if Tim's warning was true? What if there really was something bigger, and I was just a pawn? Paranoia wrapped itself around me like a cold blanket. I needed to be careful, to gather more before making any moves. The day passed in a blur. I barely ate, barely spoke. My phone buzzed twice, texts from my parents, checking in. I ignored them. I couldn't explain this without sounding insane. As evening fell, I decided to prepare for the meeting. The old warehouse by the docks was a place I'd heard about but never visited, abandoned, rumored to be a hangout for all sorts of unsavory characters. It wasn't exactly a safe spot, but it was the only lead I had. I dressed in dark clothes, grabbed my keys, and slipped out just before midnight, heart hammering in my chest. The walk to the docks was cold and quiet, the city's usual hum replaced by the distant call of gulls and the slap of waves against concrete. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal frame silhouetted against the moonlit sky. I hesitated at the entrance, the door hanging slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of decay. My footsteps echoed as I moved cautiously into the cavernous space. "Over here," Tim's voice whispered from the shadows. I followed the sound, every nerve on edge until I saw him sitting on a cracked wooden crate, face half hidden by the dim light. He looked smaller somehow, less threatening than the eerie figure I'd imagined. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said quietly. "But it's out of my hands now." "Why me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Tim glanced around nervously. "Because you're connected to something they want. Something buried in your past you don't remember. And they're watching you more than just me." My heart dropped. "Who are they?" He shook his head. I can't say yet. Not here. But I'm trying to protect you. I wanted to believe him, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Protection didn't come with hidden cameras and secret meetings in abandoned buildings. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, but then it buzzed again, insistently. Against better judgment, I pulled it out. The screen showed a new message. Stop looking. It's too late. I looked up, and Tim's expression shifted from guarded to alarmed. They know you're here, he said sharply. We have to move. Now! Before I could ask where, a loud crash echoed from the warehouse entrance, the sound of heavy footsteps. Shadows spilled into the room, and the chilling realization hit me. The nightmare wasn't just stalking me through hidden lenses anymore. It was stepping out of the dark, right into my life. Tim grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a narrow side door. This way, he hissed, yanking it open to reveal a cramped stairwell spiraling downward. The pounding grew louder, closer. Heart hammering, I followed him into the shadows, the cold stone walls pressing in as we descended. Behind us, the warehouse seemed to breathe, alive with menace. Somewhere deep below, I sensed answers and danger waiting in the dark. The stairs ended at a rusted metal grate, which Tim crouched to lift silently. Beyond, a faint glow pulsed, revealing a hidden lab humming with secrets. The cold hum of the fluorescent lights above buzzed in my ears as Tim lowered the grate behind us. Tim's voice was low, urgent. This is the nerve center. Whoever they are, they're watching everything. Not just you. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Why? What do they want from me? From us? He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to warm them. I'm still piecing it together. But it's bigger than just you or me. You said you had no memory of something in your past. That's no accident. I shook my head, frustration twisting in my gut. I don't understand. Every lead I've chased just ends in dead ends or more questions. Tim turned to a cluttered workbench, pulling out a battered laptop. He flipped it open and typed quickly, the keyboard clacking in the quiet. Look at this. He pointed to a file folder labeled with my name. I leaned in, heart pounding. The folder was packed with scanned documents, emails, photographs, everything from hospital records to security footage. But the strangest thing was buried near the bottom, a series of old newspaper clippings, all about a missing girl from 10 years ago. The girl's face was blurred, but the date matched when I was 12. Is this me? I whispered, fingers trembling. Tim nodded. It looks like you were reported missing for several days. Nobody knew where you were. Your family was desperate. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The memories I tried to bury, the fragmented flashes of a dark room, a man's voice whispering threats, suddenly felt less like nightmares and more like warnings. Why didn't I remember any of this? I asked. Because someone wanted you to forget, Tim said grimly. And whoever has these cameras, they want to make sure you don't start digging too deep. The realization hit me like a punch. This wasn't just about surveillance or obsession. It was about control. About keeping me locked inside a story I wasn't supposed to rewrite. Before I could respond, the sharp beep of a phone startled me. Tim's phone, lying on the bench, lit up with a new message. He hesitated, then read aloud, "We're watching you. One wrong move, and everything ends." His face tightened. They know we're here. They're closing in. I glanced at the monitors again, searching for any sign of movement outside the warehouse. Then I saw it, a shadow crossing a hallway just beyond one of the cameras. Someone was coming. We can't stay, Tim said, already gathering the files. We need to get this to someone who can help. I nodded, the weight of the moment sinking in. There was no going back now. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. We moved quickly through the labyrinth below the warehouse, every step echoing in the cold air. But then, halfway up the spiral stairs, a sudden noise froze me in place, a metallic click, faint but unmistakable. Tim stopped, eyes wide. They've locked us in. The door at the top slammed shut with a finality that left no doubt. The nightmare had followed us into the light. Panic threatened to claw its way up my throat, but I forced it down. The darkness seemed to thicken around us, swallowing the narrow stairwell whole. Tim fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, its beam barely piercing the shadow. "We need to find another way out," I whispered, my voice barely carrying. Tim nodded, shining the light ahead. The stairs spiraled up endlessly, but at the bottom was a hatch I hadn't noticed before, rusted, almost blending into the grimy floor, with a heavy latch. "Maybe this leads outside," I said, already dropping down on my knees to test it. The latch was stiff, but it gave way with a reluctant creak. A scent of damp earth and something metallic hit us as I pried the hatch open. The beam of the flashlight revealed a vertical shaft, disappearing into deeper darkness. "We have to climb down," Tim said, his voice tight. I swallowed hard, the cold bite of fear settling in my bones. But the urgency was undeniable. Waiting meant being trapped, and I doubted whoever locked the door would come back with anything less than hostility. I took the lead, lowering myself into the shaft, the rough stone walls scraping my hands. Tim followed, his breath quick and shallow. The air grew colder and heavier the deeper we descended, as if the building itself was exhaling some ancient dread. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, underground tunnel. The walls were damp, veins of moss glistening faintly, and the floor uneven with loose stones. The tunnel stretched ahead, curving left and right beyond what the flashlight could reach. "Which way?" Tim asked, his voice echoing softly. I hesitated, my instinct screaming to go left. "Left," I said finally. "It feels right." We moved cautiously, every sound amplified: the drip of water, the scuff of our shoes, even the distant rumble of city noise above, like a distant heartbeat reminding us we were still tethered to the world. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The flashlight beam caught on something metallic embedded in the wall, a control panel, ancient and corroded, but still faintly glowing with a dim blue light. "Looks like a power source or a security system," Tim muttered, stepping closer. "If we can hack into this, maybe we can open that door upstairs remotely." I nodded, kneeling beside the panel. The interface was foreign, a confusing tangle of symbols and faded text, but there was a faint hum beneath my fingers, a promise of life beneath the decay. "Give me a minute," I said, fingers working quickly despite the cold seeping into my bones. Tim kept watch, eyes darting toward the tunnel's entrance. Time stretched thin, every second loaded with the weight of what waited for us above. Then, a sudden warning beep from the panel jolted me. Security protocols activating. Someone was monitoring this, maybe even tracking our every move. "Got it," I said, punching in the override sequence. "Try the door now." We climbed back up the stairs, breath held, hearts pounding like tribal drums. At the top, the door's lock clicked and then slid open with a harsh mechanical groan. Fresh air rushed in, sharp with the scent of rain on concrete. We spilled out onto the warehouse floor, blinking against the dim light filtering through cracked windows. But we weren't alone. A figure stood silhouetted in the shadows across the room, watching us with cold, unblinking eyes. "Welcome back," he said, voice low and calm. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it." The nightmare hadn't just followed us into the light, it had been waiting for us all along. The figure stepped forward, the weak light catching the glint of a silver badge clipped to his jacket. "Detective Marlowe." I barely registered the relief before the tension slammed back in. Marlowe's eyes were unreadable, but there was something off, something colder than the usual city grit he wore like a second skin. "We don't have much time," he said, voice still low but edged with urgency. "They're coming back." "Who?" Jenna asked, gripping my arm. Her knuckles were white. Marlowe's gaze flicked her, then back to me. "The ones who trapped you down there. The ones who want that device and you dead." I swallowed hard. The metal cylinder strapped beneath my jacket suddenly felt heavier, as if it carried not just technology but the weight of every desperate hope and nightmare from the tunnels below. "Why didn't you warn us?" I demanded. He gave a tight smile. "One. Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though it felt like I was whispering into a void. The figure stepped forward just enough to catch the faint light. He was tall, lean, and dressed in dark clothes that blended with the shadows. His eyes, cold, calculating, didn't flicker with surprise or fear. Instead, they held a quiet satisfaction, like a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. "I'm someone who's been watching you for a long time," he said smoothly. "You and your roommate. You don't know me yet, but I know everything about you. Every move, every breath, every moment you thought you were alone." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced back to the hidden cameras I'd found in my room just days before, the creeping unease that had wormed its way into every corner of my life. This was the source, the stalker I'd feared, the person behind the obsession. Tim shifted beside me, a flicker of anger flashing in his eyes. "We're not afraid of you," he said, voice firm, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. The man smiled, a thin, unsettling curve of his lips. "Fear keeps people alive. You'll learn that soon enough." Before I could respond, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, something that looked like a remote control. He pressed a button, and overhead, the warehouse lights flickered to life one by one, revealing the vast, empty space around us. Against the far wall, dozens of screens lit up, each displaying live feeds from cameras placed all over the building and even from inside our apartment. My stomach dropped. The man was not only watching us here but had eyes everywhere we lived, breathed, and tried to hide. "How did you get in here?" I managed to ask, voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, a casual motion that belied the menace in his tone. "I own this place. It's been my project for months, watching, learning, waiting. You thought I was just some creepy landlord, or maybe a harmless weirdo. But no. I'm much more patient than that." Tim's fists clenched. "You're sick." The man's eyes gleamed. "Call it what you want. I call it dedication. You don't just find someone like you and let them slip away." My mind reeled. The months of subtle invasions, cameras hidden behind smoke detectors, microphones tucked inside light fixtures, the strange noises I dismissed as plumbing or the building settling, all pieces of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. "We're leaving," I said, trying to sound resolute, but my voice cracked. He laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the cavernous space. "You think it's that easy? I have control over everything here. Doors, alarms, even your phones. You won't get far." Suddenly, the heavy warehouse doors slammed shut with a deafening clang. I jumped, the sound reverberating through my chest. Tim moved to the nearest exit, testing the handle. Locked. We were trapped. The man took a step closer, his presence suffocating. "You're my guests now, and I intend to enjoy every moment of this." Panic bubbled up, but I forced it down. Thinking fast was the only way out. I glanced around, searching for anything that could help us, tools, weapons, even a way to disable the cameras. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "What do you want from us?" He cocked his head, considering. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you. It's about me. About control. About watching someone truly see you, every part, without filters or pretenses. You might call it obsession. I call it connection." The words sent a chill through me. Not love, not affection, control. Possession. Tim's jaw tightened. "You're sick. We'll call the cops." The man's eyes darkened. "Try it. But remember, I'm the one who controls the cameras, controls the access. You're alone." A sudden noise drew our attention, a faint scratching coming from the far corner of the room. My pulse quickened. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. The man nodded, eyes gleaming. "I thought you might." From the shadows emerged a figure, smaller, hunched, with a face obscured by a hood. My breath caught. It was the roommate, my roommate. He looked at me, his eyes wild yet resigned. "I tried to warn you," he said quietly, voice trembling. "He's not who you think he is." The man in the shadows smiled wider, eyes gleaming with triumph. Surprise. My mind spun. The man who'd been stalking me, the landlord, the watcher, was now alone. My roommate was part of this nightmare, whether willingly or not, I didn't know. And now, trapped in this warehouse with both of them, I realized escaping their obsession would take more than just running out the door. It would take fighting shadows I never knew existed. The lights flickered again, plunging us momentarily into darkness before buzzing back to life. In that brief blackout, something shifted, an unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. "We're just getting started," the man said, voice low but deadly certain. And I understood, with terrible clarity, that this nightmare was far from over. The sunlight was harsh when I woke the next morning, filtering through the cracked blinds with an accusing glare. I forced myself up, every movement sharp and deliberate. The apartment felt alien without the constant, suffocating presence of the cameras, without the silent eyes watching from the corners. Yet, the absence was almost worse than the surveillance. It left a hollow space where fear had lived, a quiet that screamed of what could have been. Tim hadn't come back after we parted ways last night. I didn't blame him. When the man in the shadows had said, "You're alone," he wasn't just threatening, it was a cold, calculated truth. The trauma of the night had fractured something in both of us. But I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. I had to take control of what little was left. I moved to the laptop, the device I'd used to uncover everything, the hidden feeds, the cameras, the twisted obsession. It felt like the fulcrum of the whole nightmare. My fingers trembled as I booted it up, half expecting to see those haunting images of myself staring back. But there was nothing. The files were gone, erased with clinical precision. Whoever had done this was meticulous, careful. I needed help. I had no illusions about calling the police immediately. The man had been right, he controlled access. Any move I made could tip him off, make things worse. Yet, I couldn't live with this shadow lingering over me. So, I made a plan, small, cautious steps, a way to regain the narrative of my own life. First, I called my sister. It was the first time I'd spoken to her in months, even though she had sensed something was wrong. Her voice was warm and steady, a balm I hadn't realized I needed. "I'm sorry I didn't say more," I told her, voice breaking. I thought I was just being paranoid. She didn't hesitate. "You're not alone. We'll figure this out together." After hanging up, I began documenting everything, dates, conversations, the layout of the apartment, every detail about the cameras and the men who had invaded my life. If I was going to fight this, I needed evidence. Not just to protect myself, but to reclaim my story from the person who had tried to erase it. That afternoon, I reached out to a local advocacy group specializing in stalking victims. Their response was immediate and practical. They helped me file a report that wouldn't be ignored, connected me with legal counsel, and most importantly, gave me a sense of agency that had been stripped away. The weight began to shift. I realized the horror wasn't just in the invasion of privacy, or even the betrayal of trust by the person I had once called a roommate. It was in the way fear had silenced me, made me doubt myself, and nearly cost me my future. Weeks passed. The landlord was arrested after the police traced his activities through a network of surveillance equipment he'd installed in other properties. My roommate, it turned out, had been coerced, trapped by threats, his own fear chaining him to a nightmare he desperately wanted to escape. He entered a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, and while I couldn't forgive him, I understood the complexity of his situation. I moved out of the apartment, choosing a place with no shared spaces, no strangers lurking in shadows. The new place was bare and unfamiliar, but safe. I replaced the locks, installed my own security system, and finally breathed without looking over my shoulder. The experience changed me. I was more guarded now, yes, but also more aware of the resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I learned the importance of boundaries, of speaking out even when the voice shakes. And, perhaps most importantly, I understood that control, true control, was mine to reclaim, not the possession of someone else's obsession. One evening, months later, I sat by the window with a book. The city's hum was distant but steady, a reminder that life, for all its darkness, moved forward. The past was a scar, not a chain. I had survived. And in that survival, I found something unbreakable, myself. The quiet moments grew longer, filled with a calm I had never known. I began to notice the small joys that had once seemed trivial, the way sunlight filtered through the curtains in the early morning, the soft rustle of pages turning, the distant laughter of children playing in the park below. These fragments of everyday life stitched together a new kind of peace, one that wasn't born from forgetting but from embracing the complexity of what had been endured. Healing, I realized, was not a destination but a continuous process. Some days were harder than others, shadows creeping in uninvited, threatening to pull me back into despair. Yet, each time, I reminded myself of the strength I carried within, the strength forged in the crucible of pain and resilience. I learned to lean into discomfort, to sit with uncertainty rather than fleeing from it. Slowly, I started to rebuild relationships that had withered under the weight of silence. Honest conversations replaced the guarded walls I had once erected. Trust was fragile but growing, like new shoots breaking through barren soil. I found allies in unexpected places, friends, mentors, even strangers whose kindness chipped away at my weariness. In this new chapter, I also discovered the power of creativity as a balm and a beacon. Writing became my refuge, a way to map the terrain of my emotions and give voice to truths that words had once failed to capture. Each sentence crafted was an act of defiance against the shadows, a declaration of presence and purpose. The future, once a daunting expanse, now held possibility. I no longer feared the unknown but welcomed it as part of the journey toward wholeness. The scars remained, yes, but they were part of my story, a testament to battles fought and survived, a reminder that even in the deepest night, dawn could break. And so, as the city continued its relentless rhythm outside my window, I turned another page, ready to write what came next, not as a victim, but as the author of my own life. Story 4, Silent Knocks in the Blizzard, Unseen Presence at the Cabin. The snow had started falling the evening before, soft and steady at first, like feathers drifting down to settle quietly on the ground. My name is Claire, and I had been working in the city for too long, caught up in a maze of noise and deadlines. The cabin belonged to my grandfather, a man who had loved this place, a modest wooden structure tucked deep in the northern woods, miles from the nearest road. I'd come here to write, or at least to try. The last manuscript had stalled somewhere between exhaustion and frustration, and I hoped the isolation would clear my head. Morning passed without much change. I made coffee, burned a few logs, and tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself staring out the window, watching the snow pile up, the branches sag under its weight. The storm was relentless, the kind of snow that could bury a place in hours and make it impossible to leave. By afternoon, the power had gone out. Not surprising. The cabin ran on a small generator, but the fuel was almost gone, and I hadn't bothered to top it off before the storm. Candles and a lantern replaced the hum of electricity, and the shadows grew long and uneven in the flickering light. I tried to ignore the creeping sense of unease, telling myself it was just the storm, the isolation, the quiet pressing in. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started with the knocks. At first, I wasn't sure if I'd heard anything. The wind was loud, and the cabin creaked as the temperature dropped. But then, unmistakably, came a faint tapping, like someone knocking on the door. Slow and hesitant. 3 soft raps. I froze. The door faced the woods, a solid slab of cedar with a heavy iron latch. Nobody was supposed to be out there, not in weather like this. I had told no one I was coming. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and with the roads buried under snow, no one could get here in a car or on foot. I waited, heart pounding, straining to listen. The knocking came again, softer this time, almost pleading. I remember thinking it must be my imagination, maybe a branch tapping against the door or the wind playing tricks. Yet the sound was too deliberate, too measured. I didn't open the door. Instead, I pulled the blanket tighter around me and sat down, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Hours passed. The storm raged on, and the knocks did not return. Later, when I finally gathered the courage to check, I found the front steps covered in snow except for a narrow trail, too deep, uneven footprints leading away from the porch into the blizzard. And there, smeared on the snow, was a thin streak of dark red. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. The blood was fresh, stark against the white, and it disappeared into the swirling snow like a whisper drawn into the wind. I locked the door again, double-checked the windows, and sat back down by the stove, the silence wrapping around me tighter than the cold outside. Something was out there. Something or someone who had knocked on my door. And the trail of blood was the only sign they left behind. I stared into the dying flames, willing them to burn brighter, to chase away the shadow pooling inside me. Minutes stretched, each one heavier than the last, until a sudden noise shattered the quiet, a faint tapping at the window, like fingernails drumming a hesitant rhythm. My heart slammed against my ribs as I swung around, eyes wide in the dim light. The snowflakes blurred the glass, but I could just make out a pale face pressed against the pane, eyes wide and desperate. The figure was a girl, no older than 12, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, lips chapped from the cold. Without thinking, I yanked the window open. "Come in. Quick," I hissed. She climbed inside, shivering, and collapsed onto the floor. Her teeth chattered as she struggled to speak. "Please, help. They're coming." "Who? Who's coming?" The firelight trembled across her frightened face. "Men with knives. They took my brother, and now they want me." Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. I forced myself to stand, grabbing my coat from the hook. "We don't have much time. You'll have to hide until morning." She nodded, burying her face against my chest. The cold seeped into my bones, but something fiercer took root in my chest, a stubborn resolve not to let whatever darkness stalked these woods claim another innocent, Outside, the wind howled like a beast eager to tear through the fragile walls of my cabin. I moved to barricade the door again, stacking chairs and whatever furniture I could find. The girl watched silently, her eyes wide and unblinking. Then the tapping returned, sharper this time, more insistent. I whispered, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The door rattled under a forceful shove. My breath hitched. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't giving up easily. Suddenly, a voice slithered through the cracks. Low, cold. "Let her out. You don't want trouble." I shook my head, gripping a heavy iron poker from the hearth. "This is my home. You're not coming in." A laugh, cruel and hollow. "You're alone and weak. Let her go, and maybe we leave you breathing." The girl whimpered behind me. My gaze hardened. They clearly underestimated me. The blood trail wasn't just a warning, it was a message. I stepped forward, voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. "Try me." The wind roared again, the door groaning under the pressure. Outside, footsteps pounded through the snow, fast, relentless, closing in. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going down without a fight. The fire had burned low when the knocking started again, this time not desperate, but deliberate, measured. "Who are you?" I called, voice low but firm, trying to buy time, to anchor myself against the rising tide of panic. No answer. Just a tapping, persistent and steady. It was hours before the knocking stopped altogether. The wind outside had died to a dull roar, but the silence that followed was worse, thick and suffocating, as if the storm had pulled back only to let something worse take its place. I glanced at the girl. She was curled into herself, eyes squeezed shut like she was trying to keep the terror out. I wanted to say something reassuring, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I settled for a quiet, "We'll get through this." Morning came slowly. The weak light filtered through the frost-coated windows, casting long shadows across the cabin's floor. I'd barely slept, my mind too restless, replaying the night's sounds over and over. The girl was still asleep, curled beneath a threadbare blanket on the couch. I didn't have the heart to wake her. I moved to the door, heart hammering with a mixture of dread and resolve. The barricades I'd stacked last night were scattered crudely on the floor, torn down by the pounding from outside. The lock was scratched and battered, but still intact. Whoever had been out there hadn't gotten in. Not yet. Then I noticed something else. The snow just beyond the porch was stained a deep, angry red. The trail of blood from the night before. It hadn't stopped. Grim and determined, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the cold biting through layers of wool and fleece. The blood trail led away from the cabin, disappearing into the thick woods blanketed by white. I followed it cautiously, each step crunching against the frozen ground. The trail was fresh, the blood still wet, smeared across patches of snow and frozen leaves. It twisted and turned, as if whoever had left it was staggered, limping. Occasionally, I found drops splattered against tree trunks, like desperate markers. As I moved deeper into the forest, the wind picked up again, carrying with it a biting chill and the faint scent of iron. The trees loomed tall and silent, their branches heavy with snow. Every snap of a twig made me jump, my senses on high alert. Then I saw it, footprints. Two sets, one small and uneven, the other larger and more deliberate. The girl's? Or someone else's? I couldn't be sure. The prints led deeper into the woods, toward a clearing I knew was used by hunters in the summer. My mind raced with questions. Had the girl's brother been taken here? Were the men still close? Was this some twisted game, a hunt in the wilderness where the prey was human? The weight of the iron poker in my hand felt reassuring, but I knew it was barely a weapon against whoever lurked out here. I had to be smarter, faster. Suddenly, a noise, soft but distinct. A low moan, carried faintly on the wind. I froze, listening. It came again, closer this time. A cry for help, raw and desperate. I followed the sound, heart pounding. Through the thinning trees, I spotted a figure slumped against a fallen log, face pale and streaked with blood. It was a man, barely conscious, his breathing shallow. I rushed to him, dropping to my knees. "Are you okay?" "What happened?" He opened his eyes, clouded with pain. They took her. Said I'd be next if I didn't lead them to the girl." "Who?" "Who took her?" I pressed, glancing around nervously. "Men, local. They run this area, hunting anyone who gets too close. You're lucky to have the girl. But they'll come for you both." A cold shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't random. It was planned, calculated, and I was in the middle of it. I helped the man to his feet, supporting his weight as best I could. The blood trail, the knocks, the threats, it was all connected. Whoever these men were, they'd been watching the cabin, waiting for an opportunity. Back at the cabin, I secured the door again, double-checking every lock and barricade. The girl was awake now, eyes wary but alert. I told her about the man, his warning. "We have to be ready," I said quietly. "They're not going to stop until they get her." She nodded, determination flickering behind her fear. "They'll come at night, when it's darkest." And I knew she was right. As night fell, the wind began to howl once more. The knocking started again, this time accompanied by voices, low and taunting. The game was far from over. But I wasn't going to let them win. Not yet. I moved closer to the window, peering into the blackness beyond the glass. Shadows shifted just beyond the edge of the porch light, figures lurking in the periphery. The voices grew louder, weaving threats that brushed against the edges of sanity. I gripped the girl's hand, grounding her and myself in the moment. "Stay close," I whispered. "We'll get through this." The door rattled violently, splinters threatening to give way under the assault. I scanned the room for something, anything that could serve as a defense. My eyes landed on the fireplace poker, heavy and cold. Grabbing it, I stepped toward the door, muscles tense, heart pounding like a drum. The night was closing in, but so was my resolve. They thought the darkness gave them power. They hadn't met me yet. The dawn crept in pale and brittle, seeping through frost-laced windows like a tentative promise. The girl sat huddled by the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest, eyes fixed on the flickering flames as if they could burn away the fear surrounding us. I traced the line of her jaw, the way her hands trembled slightly, and found a steadying resolve I hadn't expected to feel so soon. We were tethered now, not just by circumstance, but by something sharper, more urgent. Survival. Protection. I walked to the door, running my fingers over the cold wood, the scars left from last night's desperate defense still visible, scratches, splintered edges, a reminder that these walls were no fortress. They were fragile. Temporary. And yet, the knocking had stopped. I thought about the man we'd left leaning against a tree, bleeding and pale in the snow, his warning etched into my mind. They run this area. They're hunting. They want the girl. That knowledge was a noose tightening around us, an invisible hunter's leash pulling taut with each breath I took. What I didn't understand was why. Why this girl? What made her so valuable, so dangerous to those men? I paced the small cabin, every creak and groan amplified in the quiet. The girl watched me, her eyes sharp despite the fatigue. "What do you think they want?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, but the truth was, I had a theory. The man's warning wasn't just about possession. It was about control. Whoever these men were, they wanted to erase any trace of this girl's existence, silence her completely. And if they couldn't have her, they'd come for me next. Hours passed in this tense limbo. I tried to keep us calm, rationing the dwindling supplies, building makeshift barricades with whatever I could find. The fireplace poker stayed near the door, a cold comfort. Each sound outside, branches snapping, the howl of the wind, set my nerves on edge. Then, just as the afternoon light waned, the knocking started again. Faint at first, almost hesitant. Then clearer, more urgent. I froze, heart pounding with a cocktail of dread and cautious hope. Could it be a trap? Or could it be someone else? Someone not part of this cruel game? I crept to the door, the girl close behind me. The knocks came again, 3 sharp raps, deliberate. I gripped the poker tighter, preparing for the worst. Please, a voice rasped through the wood. Help me. The voice was weak, desperate. Human. I hesitated, torn between fear and the instinct to help. The snow had slowed to a soft whisper now, muffling everything beyond the porch. I glanced back at the girl, whose eyes were wide but resolute. We have to see who it is, I said quietly. I unlatched the bolt and swung the door open. The cold air hit me like a slap, carrying with it the sharp bite of winter and the scent of iron. But no one was there. Only the swirling snow and the ghostly silence of the forest. Then my eyes caught it, a crimson streak smeared across the snowbank, leading away from the porch and into the blizzard. The blood was fresh, bright against the white, and it vanished into the swirling curtain of snow and ice. I stepped outside, heart hammering, the poker clutched in one hand, the door barely hanging open behind me. Hello? I called into the storm, voice raw. Is someone out there? The trail led deeper into the woods, a thin, flickering thread of life and violence disappearing into the gray. I wanted to follow, to find whoever was out there, but the girl's hand on my arm stopped me. Wait, she said, voice trembling. It's a trap. I nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. Whoever left the trail wanted us to come out, to walk into the storm, into their hands. But the thought of leaving them out there, bleeding, alone, felt impossible. We stood frozen, the snow swirling around us like a living thing, hiding whatever waited beyond. Then, from the trees, a sudden crack, a sharp snap of a branch, and a figure emerged, stumbling through the white haze, face pale and eyes wild. I raised the poker, ready to defend, but the figure fell to their knees, clutching their side, blood soaking through their coat. Help me, they gasped. They're coming. Behind them, the storm seemed to part just enough to reveal dark shapes moving fast, too fast, closing in with silent menace. The game had changed. The hunters were no longer just voices outside. They were here. And they weren't going to stop until they had what they came for. I looked at the girl, saw the same fierce determination mirrored in her eyes. We had crossed a point of no return. There was no turning back now. Without hesitation, I grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the narrow alley where shadows thickened. Every step echoed with urgency, our breaths ragged in the cold night air. The pulse of fear thrummed in my ears as the dark shapes edged closer, relentless and unyielding. Somewhere ahead, a faint glimmer of light promised refuge, a chance, however slim, to survive. We couldn't afford to falter. With a final glance over my shoulder, I whispered, "Stay close. We fight together." And together, we vanished into the darkness, hearts pounding like war drums. The alley twisted sharply, forcing us into a maze of brick and iron that swallowed sound and sight alike. My fingers scraped against the rough walls as I strained to keep pace with the others, their ragged breaths mingling with mine in the thick night air. The faint glow ahead grew steadier, casting a pale halo that pierced the black like a beacon of hope. Suddenly, a sharp cry shattered the tense silence. Marcus stumbled, clutching his side where a dark stain bloomed beneath his torn jacket. "Go on without me," he gasped, eyes fierce despite the pain. But I shook my head, refusing to leave him behind. "No! We're in this together." Before the shadows could close in, Clara darted forward, pulling a rusted metal pipe from a nearby dumpster. Her grip was tight, hands steady despite the fear that flickered in her eyes. "Cover me," she hissed, stepping into the dim light where the first figures emerged from the gloom. The air thickened with the promise of violence. A sudden crash echoed as the gang's leader lunged, but Clara met him with a fierce swing that sent him sprawling. The others hesitated, their snarls momentarily muffled by shock. "Now!" I shouted, and we surged forward, the fragile hope of that distant light pushing us beyond exhaustion. Breathless and battered, we crossed the threshold into the small courtyard bathed in amber glow. Safe, for now, but the night was far from over. We had survived the shadows, but the fight was just beginning. The morning light was weak and gray, filtered through thick clouds that promised no reprieve from the storm. Last night's knocks still echoed in my mind, faint, desperate, almost pleading. I hesitated, paralyzed by suspicion. When I'd finally summoned the courage to open the door, the biting wind had shoved it wide, and the porch was empty except for a slick trail of blood smeared across the snow. It led away into the blizzard, vanishing into the white abyss. No footprints, no sign of anyone alive. Just that cruel, bleeding path. Marcus's injury made everything worse. The makeshift bandage Clara had tied around his side was soaked through by dawn, the dark stain spreading. His breathing was shallow, and his face pale beneath the grime. We hadn't spoken much since we'd settled inside the cabin. There was no room for words, only the heavy weight of fear pressing down on us. Clara paced near the stove, restless and alert. "We can't just wait here," she muttered, glancing toward the door like it might explode open at any moment. "Something's out there. And it's coming." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The gang, those shadows from last night, they hadn't given up. I could feel it in the silence, in the way the wind seemed to carry distant, muffled sounds. Footsteps, maybe. Or something worse. "We need to know what that blood trail means," I said, voice low. "If someone's hurt out there, we can't just ignore it." Clara's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and fear. "Or it's a trap. Maybe they want us to come out. Lure us into the storm." I didn't argue. The thought had crossed my mind more than once. But Marcus's worsening condition pushed me to act. "I'm going to check it out," I said firmly. "We can't stay blind." She grabbed my arm before I could move. "No! You're hurt too. You're not thinking straight." "I have to," I said. "If he dies here, we'll all be dead anyway." The storm howled outside, rattling the windows like a beast trying to claw its way in. The cabin's loneliness pressed in, suffocating and absolute. I pulled on my coat, gloves, and boots, gathering what little supplies we had: an old hunting knife, a flashlight with fading batteries, and a small first aid kit. Clara didn't protest as I slipped out the door, but the tension between us was sharp enough to cut. I stepped into the blizzard, the cold searing through my layers immediately. The blood trail was faint but visible, a crimson smear against the endless white, glistening under the weak daylight. I followed it, taking slow, careful steps. Each crunch of snow underfoot felt like a thunderclap in the silence. The trail led away from the cabin, veering toward the dense woods that lined the clearing. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my face, trying to shield myself from the biting wind and the growing sense of dread. The blood was fresh, the drops irregular, as if whoever had bled was moving erratically, limping, maybe. I scanned the tree line, looking for signs of movement or shelter. Then I heard a faint groan, barely audible over the wind. I quickened my pace, heart pounding. Through the swirling snow, I spotted a figure slumped against a tree, half hidden beneath a fallen branch. It was a man, his clothes torn and stained, face pale and drawn. Blood seeped from a deep gash on his leg, soaking the snow beneath him. "Hey," I called out, voice steady despite the cold. "Are you okay?" He stirred, eyes flickering open. Fear and relief battled in his gaze. "Please, help me," he whispered. I knelt beside him, pulling off my gloves to examine the wound. The cut was jagged, possibly from a knife or broken glass. He was losing too much blood to stay conscious much longer. "Can you stand?" I asked. He nodded weakly, but the effort made him gasp. "I can't, not far." I looked back toward the cabin, torn between urgency and caution. Bringing him inside risked everything: our safety, our limited resources, but leaving him in certain death. "Come on," I said quietly, helping him to his feet. His weight was heavy, but I managed to support him as we staggered back through the storm. The wind slammed against us, threatening to knock us down, but I gritted my teeth and pressed on. When we finally reached the cabin, Clara rushed to help, her face tight with worry. "You found him," she said, relief mingling with suspicion. "I did." "He's hurt bad." Marcus lay still on the cot, eyes closed. The new arrival sat, shivering, and I began cleaning the wound as best I could. The man's name was Tom, and he claimed to be a local hunter caught in the storm. His story was fragmented, but one thing was clear: he'd been running from someone dangerous. "Who?" Clara asked sharply. Tom hesitated, then whispered, "The gang. The ones you saw last night. They're after me." The room fell silent. The stakes had just risen beyond anything I'd imagined. Outside, the storm showed no sign of letting up. And now, so did the danger. I glanced toward the barred window, shadows stretching like fingers across the floor. "We can't let them find you here," I said, locking the door behind me. Clara nodded, already moving to barricade the entrance. Tom's breathing grew heavier. Fear was contagious in that cramped room. The storm had eased by dawn, a brittle silence settling over the snow-blanketed forest. I sat beside the cot, watching him sleep, his face slack but peaceful for the first time since he arrived. Clara was in the kitchen area, quietly clearing the meager breakfast dishes, her movements careful and deliberate. The tension that had gripped us the night before still lingered, but the immediate danger seemed to have passed, or at least receded. We barricaded every entrance with whatever heavy furniture we could find. The snowstorm had trapped us all in here, but it had also kept the gang from reaching the cabin. For now. I rubbed my hands together, the warmth from the small stove barely reaching my fingers. Last night's events replayed in my mind: the desperate knocks, the trail of blood vanishing into the blizzard, Tom's haunted eyes, the urgency in his voice. It was a nightmare made real, and it had changed everything. Clara approached, her expression softer than before. "We should talk," she said quietly, sitting across from me. "About what we do next." I nodded. "We can't stay here forever. Supplies won't last, and if that gang is still out there..." "They'll come back," she finished. "They want Tom, and they won't stop until they find him." Tom stirred, his eyes fluttering open. I looked over, offering a small smile. "You're awake." He grimaced but managed to nod. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to drag this trouble here." "You didn't," I said firmly. "But now we have to figure out how to get you out safely." Clara leaned forward, her fingers curling into a fist. The roads are impassable. No one's coming for miles. We have to think carefully. I glanced at the window. Outside, the world was still white and silent, but the forest beyond felt different, watchful. I want to trust you, I said to Tom, but I don't know if I can. You've been through something terrible, but what if they're closer than we think? He met my gaze steadily. I don't blame you. I don't trust anyone either. But if I don't leave, they'll come, and they'll kill whoever's here. The weight of his words settled between us. We were all prisoners of fear, caught in a trap with no clear way out. That afternoon, the storm had faded to a faint whisper, and Tom's leg looked a little better after I cleaned and dressed the wound again. Clara and I took turns keeping watch, ears straining for any sound beyond the wind. Around mid-afternoon, a crunch outside made us freeze. I crept to the window, heart pounding. A lone figure emerged from the gray haze, a man, tall and thin, wrapped in a heavy coat, his face shadowed by a hood. "Who is it?" Clara whispered, stepping beside me. I hesitated, then opened the door a crack. The man raised his hands slowly. "I'm a deputy," he said, voice low but clear. "I've been looking for you all since last night. I heard gunshots near the ridge. There's been a shootout." Relief and suspicion warred inside me. "How did you find us in this weather?" Radio went dead. I tracked footprints, 2 sets. One was fresh, bleeding. The other was older. I followed both here. I glanced back at Tom, whose eyes flickered with cautious hope. The deputy stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind him. "We need to move. That gang isn't just after your friend, they're dangerous criminals. I'm here to get you out." Plans formed quickly. With the deputy's help, we fortified the cabin further and prepared to leave once Tom was mobile enough. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a mix of exhaustion, relief, and a faint hope. That night, as the fire died down to embers, I sat alone by the window, watching the dark forest beyond. The fear that had clawed at me for days was still there, but it was tempered now by something else, resolve. I thought back to the first night trapped here, the endless knocks that shattered the silence, the blood trail that led to Tom's broken body. I had been terrified then, paralyzed by the unknown. But now, I understood something deeper. Fear was a cage, but action, no matter how small, was the key to escape. Morning came with the promise of departure. Tom could stand, leaning heavily on a sturdy branch the deputy had fashioned into a crutch. Clara gathered our sparse belongings, her face set with determination. As we stepped outside, the snow crunched beneath our boots, the cold biting but invigorating. The deputy led the way, breaking a trail through the frozen world. We moved slowly, but with purpose. At one point, Tom stopped, looking back at the cabin, the place that had been his refuge and our prison. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving me." Clara smiled softly. We saved each other. I felt a shift inside me, a shedding of the helplessness that had weighed me down. Out here, facing danger and uncertainty, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. Hours later, when the trees thinned and the first signs of civilization appeared, a distant road, a faint hum of engines, I realized how much I had changed. The forest's silence was no longer a threat but a memory, a chapter closed. The deputy radioed for backup, and soon, help arrived. The gang was nowhere to be found. Whether they had given up or were regrouping, we didn't know. But that didn't matter anymore. Tom was taken to a hospital. Clara and I stayed behind briefly, lingering by the edge of the forest. She turned to me, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't know what comes next, but I'm glad we're here, together." I nodded, feeling the weight of words I couldn't quite speak. The cabin, the storm, The terror, they had tested us, broken us, and reshaped us. As the sun climbed higher, melting snow into shimmering rivers, I let myself believe in the possibility of safety, of healing. And though the memory of those desperate knocks and that bloody trail would linger, I knew I had faced the darkness and survived, not unscarred, but unbroken. The forest was still, but I was no longer afraid. Story 5, The Neighbor Next Door, Friendly Facade, Sinister Truth. I never considered myself the type to notice small things, little shifts in the atmosphere, or the subtle rearrangement of objects around my apartment. I lived alone in a modest two-bedroom on the second floor of an aging brick building in the city's east side. The neighborhood was a patchwork of old mom-and-pop shops, faded apartment blocks, and the occasional new cafe trying to revive some sense of charm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home. I moved in here 3 years ago, after a messy breakup and a job change that brought me closer to where I wanted to be. Nothing extraordinary happened, and that was exactly what I wanted. The building itself had a certain character: creaky floorboards, the faint smell of damp after rain, and a thin paper-thin wall that let me hear my neighbors' late-night arguments or the chatter of their visitors. I wasn't particularly social, but I exchanged nods or brief greetings with the handful of residents I saw regularly. Mostly, I kept to myself. That all shifted a little 2 months ago when the new neighbor moved in next door. I first saw him while I was hauling a heavy box up the stairs. He was already inside the building, struggling with an overstuffed duffel bag and a potted plant that looked like it had seen better days. He was tall, with short dark hair and an easy smile that felt a little too practiced, but I'm not one to judge. I offered to help, and he accepted without hesitation. "Thanks, I'm Mark," he said as I juggled the plant and the bag into his apartment. "I'm Ellie," I replied, wiping sweat from my brow. Mark was friendly, maybe a little eager. Over the next few weeks, he dropped by with small gestures, a plate of cookies, and offered to water my plants when I was out of town, even a flashlight when my power went out during the thunderstorm last month. I appreciated the kindness, though I kept my distance. I wasn't used to neighbors like this, and part of me felt uneasy about how quickly he inserted himself into my life. Still, I chalked it up to loneliness on his part. He mentioned once that he had moved here from out of state, that he worked from home, and that he was new to the city. It was natural to want to make connections. The first time I noticed something was off was about a week ago. I had invited a few friends over for a casual dinner, nothing fancy. I spent the afternoon cleaning and prepping, bought some new candles, tidied up my bookshelves, and laid out the plates and glasses. When I went to grab the bottle of red wine I had stashed in the sideboard, it was gone. I thought maybe I'd misplaced it, so I searched the kitchen, the living room, even my bedroom. Nothing. I didn't think much of it, assuming I'd accidentally moved it elsewhere. But when I told Mark about it the next day, more in passing than anything, he nodded knowingly. "Oh, I think I saw a bottle in my apartment that looked like yours," he said casually, as if this was no big deal. "I might have picked it up by mistake when I was over here watering your plants." I laughed it off, but the idea that he had been inside my apartment without asking made me uneasy. I asked him to be more careful, and he apologized, promising it wouldn't happen again. I let it go. Then came the missing keys. I usually left a spare set hidden in the small flower pot on my balcony, a habit I'd picked up after locking myself out too many times as a teenager. Over the last few days, I noticed the spare was gone. Not just that, it felt like someone had been inside my balcony, because the pot was knocked over, soil spilled across the floor. I was confident I hadn't done that. I called Mark's apartment, but he didn't answer. I waited for a few hours, hoping he might come home before I went over, but there was no sign of him. The unease crept in, growing heavier and harder to ignore. Last night, I found a small note slipped under my door. It was typed, no signature. It read, "Hope you don't mind the help." It's easier when things are in the right place. It wasn't threatening, not exactly. But it was intimate in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. I double-checked every lock, every window. I moved the spare keys inside my apartment, hidden in a drawer I never opened. I started keeping my phone close, even when I was home alone. Still, the feeling of being watched hovered just beyond the edges of my awareness. Then, this morning, I found my favorite jacket folded neatly on Mark's doorstep. I hadn't lent it to him. I'd been wearing it the last time I saw him a few days ago. I stood there, staring at the navy blue fabric in the pale light of dawn, the street still quiet around me. The jacket was unmistakably mine, the small tear on the left cuff, the worn lining inside the pocket. A part of me wanted to knock on his door, demand an explanation. But another part, something deeper and more cautious, backed away. I slipped the jacket inside and closed the door, heart racing. Who was this man, really? And how much did he know about me? I wasn't sure if I was more terrified or confused. One thing was clear, this wasn't just neighborly help anymore. Something had shifted, and I was already too entangled to step back. I thought I knew my own life. But what if someone else had been living in the shadows of it, learning, watching, waiting? And what if the next step wasn't just borrowing a jacket or borrowing a key, but taking over entirely? I didn't have answers. But I knew I had to find them, and fast. The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds, casting a pale wash of light across the small kitchen table where I sat, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. I stared out the window, half expecting to see Mark's silhouette in the hallway or a shadow lurking just beyond the threshold. But the hallway was empty, quiet. The building hummed with the usual morning sounds, distant footsteps, the faint rattle of a garbage truck, but nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the knowledge that my jacket had been moved without permission gnawed at me. I tried to shake off the creeping paranoia and get on with my day. There was work to do, emails piling up, errands waiting. But the unease stayed with me, like a low pulse just beneath the surface. I decided I needed to confront this head-on, or at least gather something concrete. My first thought was to check the security cameras in the building. I didn't have any in my apartment, but the landlord had installed a few in the hallways and near the entrance after a spate of petty thefts last year. Maybe, just maybe, I could catch a glimpse of whoever had been in my space. I called the landlord's office. They were vague but polite, saying I have to make a formal request to review footage, which might take a few days. That wasn't going to help me now. I hung up, frustrated and more restless than before. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I barely registered the passing hours until I realized I'd been staring at the same email for 20 minutes without typing a word. It was time to get out of the apartment. I told myself a walk might clear my head, but even stepping outside felt wrong. The familiar streets suddenly seemed alien, almost hostile. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see Mark or someone else watching me from a distance. I stopped at a small cafe a block away, ordered a black coffee, and sat by the window. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my photos, looking for anything unusual in my recent pictures. Maybe I'd taken a photo I'd forgotten about, something that could explain the jacket or the note. Then, a message popped up, a text from an unknown number. My heart jumped. Did you find the jacket? Hope it's comfortable. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling as I typed back, "Who's this?" No reply. I showed the message to the barista, a young woman with a sympathetic smile. Sounds like a prank, she said, but I wasn't convinced. I left the cafe, deciding to swing by Mark's apartment again. I needed to see him, to ask questions, but every time I thought of knocking on his door, my throat tightened. What if he was involved? Or worse, what if he already knew more than he was letting on? When I reached his door, I hesitated. The jacket still lay folded neatly on his doorstep, as if waiting for me. I picked it up and carried it inside, just in case. I started pacing the apartment, trying to piece things together. Then, I noticed something else. The small silver keychain I always kept on the kitchen counter, my spare key. It wasn't there. I searched every nook and cranny, the drawers, under the couch cushions, behind the refrigerator. Nothing. Panic rose in my chest. The spare key wasn't just a backup, it was the last line of defense if someone managed to get into my place while I was away. Had Mark taken it? Or was it someone else? I grabbed my phone and called the building's front desk, hoping the doorman might have seen something unusual. After a long wait, a tired voice answered. "No, sorry. Nothing out of the ordinary. I haven't seen anyone suspicious around your floor." I thanked him but didn't feel any better. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the jacket. My mind raced. If someone had my spare key, they could come and go as they pleased. The overturned plant wasn't an accident, it was a message, a warning, or maybe a test. I thought about the note again. Hope you don't mind the help. It's easier when things are in the right place. Help. Was it really help? Or control? I decided to check my inventory of missing items, things I'd noticed gone over the past few weeks that I hadn't connected before. The silver key was new, but there was also the small notebook I kept by my bed, filled with personal thoughts and sketches. It had vanished about 10 days ago. My favorite pair of sunglasses disappeared last week, only to show up in Mark's mailbox the day after. It was as if someone was living my life in parallel, borrowing pieces of me until the outline was complete. I felt exposed, stripped bare. The idea of someone else moving through my world, wearing my skin like a mask, was almost too much to bear. I needed proof. I needed to see where my things were going, who was handling them, and why. That night, I stayed awake, the jacket folded on the chair beside me. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the hallway lights sent my heart racing. I checked my locks repeatedly, convinced I'd hear a key turning any moment. Around midnight, a soft knock sounded at my door. I froze. The knock came again, slow and deliberate. I peeked through the peephole. There was no one there. I opened the door a crack, heart in my throat, and looked down the empty hallway. Nothing. But then, on the floor, just beyond my threshold, lay a small, worn book. I picked it up carefully. It was my notebook. The pages were dog-eared and creased, filled with notes in my handwriting, but some pages were missing. Others had new entries, written in a different pen, different hand, but the words were eerily familiar. I sank to the floor, gripping the book tightly. Someone had been inside my life in ways I hadn't imagined. Someone was rewriting my story. And now, it was only a matter of time before they tried to live it for themselves. The morning light spilled unevenly through the blinds, casting long, lazy stripes across the floor. I didn't sleep. Not really. I just drifted between waking and restless half-dreams, the image of that notebook burning itself into my mind. It was no longer just a diary or a sketchbook. It was a map one I hadn't drawn but was being used against me. After a long, shaky breath, I got up and went to the kitchen, the silence of my apartment suddenly oppressive. I knew I couldn't stay here alone, not today. I needed answers, or at least, a direction. Mark's place was just down the hall. The idea of confronting him was uncomfortable, but I had no one else to turn to. I needed to know if he had noticed anything strange, or if, in some twisted way, he was involved. I knocked softly. The door opened before I could step back, and there he was, his usual easy smile faltering just a bit when he saw the notebook in my hands. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. His eyes flicked to the book and back to me. I don't know, I admitted. This showed up last night. My notebook. But it's different. Someone's been inside it, adding things, taking things out. Mark's brow furrowed deeply. That's creepy. Did you talk to the cops? I shook my head. No. Not yet. I don't even know what I'm dealing with. But, Mark, this is serious. Someone is watching me. Living like me. And they have my stuff. He glanced over his shoulder, then pulled me inside. We need to figure out who. And fast. We sat down at his tiny kitchen table, the notebook open between us. I flipped through the pages carefully, pointing out the altered entries. Some were subtle, phrases changed, dates shifted. Others were outright additions, passages in neat, precise handwriting that wasn't mine but eerily familiar, like a distorted echo. Mark leaned in, his jaw tight. This is someone who knows you well. Too well. Do you have any idea who? My mind flashed back to the silver key, the sunglasses, the plant knocked over. The neighbor. The one who's been helping. Mark's face paled. You think he's behind this? I don't know, I said, voice barely a whisper. But I need to find out. I need to see inside his place. Mark hesitated. That's risky. What if he catches you? I don't have a choice. If this is some kind of game, I want to know the rules. Later that afternoon, after Mark left for work, I stood in front of my neighbor's door, the silver key heavy in my palm. It was the same key I'd found in my apartment weeks ago, one I never had before. I hoped it was a coincidence, but now, it felt like a rope pulling me toward a precipice. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, almost too smoothly, and the door clicked open. The hallway inside smelled faintly of lavender and something sterile, like a hospital room. The apartment was unnervingly tidy, too tidy. Everything was in its place, but it was a place I recognized. The coffee mug on the counter was the same one I'd lost last month. The books on the shelf matched the titles stacked beside my bed. And then I saw it, my sunglasses, resting on a small table near the window. My breath caught, and I had to steady my hands against the wall. I moved deeper inside, the silence thick and suffocating. There were photos taped to the fridge, pictures of me, taken from angles I hadn't noticed before. A calendar on the wall was marked with notes in that same unfamiliar handwriting, appointments I'd never made. I found a laptop on the desk, its screen open to a folder labeled with my name. Inside were documents, copies of my ID, emails, even scanned copies of my credit cards. Someone had been building a dossier on me. Building a life around me. And then I heard it, a faint rustle, the softest footstep behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. I wasn't alone. The door creaked behind me, and I realized, with a chill that settled deep in my bones, that I'd crossed a line. There was no turning back. Because now, they knew I was here. And they were waiting. A sudden breath caught in my throat as the shadows shifted just beyond the sliver of light spilling from the doorway. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I forced myself to stay still, listening. The faint hum of an air vent was the only sound, but beneath it, something else, a barely perceptible click, like a safety being released. My mind raced. Was that a gun? Or just a lock? Whoever was here wasn't interested in a conversation. The weight of the dossier in my hands felt heavier, as if its contents could tip the scales of whatever game was unfolding. I had no choice but to move, to find a way out before the unknown closed the room like a trap. I edged toward the window, pulling back the thin curtain to peer outside. The old building overlooked a deserted alley, slick with rain and dimly lit by a flickering street lamp. No sign of anyone, but the feeling of eyes watching me from the darkness was undeniable. Suddenly, the door handle turned, slow and deliberate. My pulse surged as I ducked behind the desk just as the door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, tall, clad in a dark coat, face obscured by shadows. The air grew colder, the room smaller. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, low and steady. "Now, you're part of this, whether you like it or not." The room held its breath in the moments after the door had creaked open, that low voice hanging in the stale air like a noose tightening around my neck. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said again, firmer this time. "Now, you're part of this, whether you like it or not." The shadow didn't move further inside the room. The door was half open, blocking much of the faint hallway light behind them, but the figure's presence was all-encompassing, like a void pressing in on every side. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice out even though it felt like my throat was clogged with dry wood. "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. Then a slow, deliberate step forward, the scrape of a shoe against the scuffed floor. The figure's face remained hidden, but the voice softened, almost amused. "I want what's mine. What's always been mine." That sent a shiver down my spine. What did that even mean? Mine? I was the one who had been living this life, working this job, paying these bills, making these plans. Who the hell was this person? I glanced at the dossier again, the stack of documents that felt like a blueprint for my destruction. My ID, my emails, my credit cards, everything meticulously copied and cataloged. Whoever this was, they had been living in my shadow long before today. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, voice steadier than I expected. "Why me?" The figure hesitated, then stepped fully into the room, the dim light catching the edge of their coat. "Because you're replaceable. And I'm better at it." I fought the urge to back away, to run, but the door was behind me. The thought of escape felt like a cruel joke. Better? How? They smiled, a slow, chilling curve of lips that didn't reach their eyes. "You've been sloppy. Forgetful. You left things unattended." I just picked up the slack. Their eyes flicked to the dossier in my hands. "I've been living your life, piece by piece. The meals you forgot to cook, the calls you missed, the little things that make a person who they are." I felt a cold wave of nausea. The missing items, the times I thought I just misplaced something, this person had been there, stealing my life bit by bit. There was a pause, heavy and charged. I had to find something, anything, to hold on to, some way to fight back. "Why did you let me find this?" I asked, nodding toward the dossier. The smile widened. "Because you need to understand. This isn't a game. Not for me. You're obsolete. Soon enough, you'll be gone. Gone." The word echoed, hollow and terrifying. I thought about my apartment, my job, my friends, everything that felt like my life. And now, it was all a fragile illusion. "Look around," the figure said, gesturing broadly to the room. "This is your life. And this," they nodded at the dossier, "is mine. Soon, I'll take the rest, your job, your relationships, your place in the world. You won't just be missing items anymore. You'll be missing." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing mind. This was beyond anything I'd imagined. This wasn't just a creepy neighbor or a stalker, it was a calculated erasure. I needed to get out. But the door was still open, and the hallway beyond was dark and empty. I considered bolting, but the figure's eyes held me in place, cold and unwavering. "Why me?" I repeated, desperate for any crack in this twisted logic. They stepped closer, lowering their voice to a whisper. Because you're the only one who ever noticed. That stopped me cold. The only one who ever noticed. All the times I'd felt watched, followed, the little things that didn't add up, it was because I'd paid attention. I clenched the dossier tighter, the papers now a shield and a weapon. If this person wanted to replace me, I wasn't going down without a fight. Suddenly, the figure reached into their coat pocket, pulling out a small object that gleamed in the dim light. My breath caught. A key. A knife? Before I could react, the door to the room slammed shut with a deafening bang. The lock clicked into place. We're going to have a lot to talk about, the figure said, voice low and final. And then, the room went dark. My hands fumbled for the light switch, but the power had been cut. The only sound was my own breath, ragged and shallow, and the slow, deliberate footsteps of the person who had been living my life all along, now fully stepping into the life they had stolen. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to inhale deeply, searching for calm amid the chaos. The faintest glint caught my eye, a small beam of moonlight slicing through the narrow window near the ceiling. If I could just reach it, maybe I could signal someone, anyone. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic on the floor. A key? No, heavier, like a small piece of broken pipe or a blunt tool. I gripped it tightly, the rough edges biting into my palm. The footsteps paused. A breath, then a whisper, barely audible. You don't understand what's at stake. The figure's presence was closer now, their warmth almost suffocating in the confined space. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of betrayal, the stolen identity, the lies threading through every interaction. But beneath the fear, a stubborn ember of resolve ignited. I wouldn't let this be the end. Suddenly, the faintest creak of the door's edge suggested a flaw in the lock, a subtle give. Moving cautiously, I prepared to test it, the metallic object poised as both weapon and tool. The game had shifted. Now it was about survival and reclaiming my life. The lock gave way with a soft, reluctant click. The apartment was eerily quiet. No footsteps. No signs that the figure, my double, had followed me. I moved cautiously, the familiar space now twisted into something alien. My own home had become a maze of suspicion and dread. I scanned the walls, the furniture, the scattered belongings, looking for anything out of place. And then I saw it, my laptop, sitting on the kitchen counter, screen cracked but still blinking faintly. It wasn't mine, at least, not anymore. On the screen was a document, open and unsaved, filled with fragments of my life, my emails, my contacts, the careful notes I'd kept about the neighbor's oddness. This person had been living in my shadow for months, maybe longer, collecting pieces of me like a hunter gathering trophies. But why? To replace me? To erase me? The thought sent a pang of something darker than fear, betrayal, pure and raw. I needed proof. Something concrete to show the police. I rifled through the drawers, hoping to find some clue, some hard evidence. That's when I noticed a photo album, one I hadn't seen before, tucked behind a stack of magazines. The cover was worn, the title handwritten in a shaky script, My Life. I flipped it open, heart sinking as I saw my face staring back at me from dozens of pictures, some recent, some older. But the captions, written in the same scrawl as the title, were wrong. Dates didn't match, events distorted. It was a twisted version of my life, rewritten by someone who thought they could rewrite me. At that moment, the familiar creak of the front door jolted me. I hid behind the corner, the metal piece still clenched in my fist. The figure entered, calm, composed, almost casual. They didn't see me at first, moving straight to the kitchen, pulling out a small bag from under the counter, the bag that had been missing from my own closet for weeks. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stepped out. "Why?" I whispered, voice barely more than a breath. They turned slowly, eyes calm and unblinking. "Because you never noticed. Because you never cared enough." The accusation stung more than I expected. For years, I'd buried parts of myself beneath routines and distractions, never imagining someone could exploit that. "I noticed," I said quietly, when it was too late. They smiled, a thin, cruel curve of lips. "It's not too late. Not yet." The conversation that followed was a chilling confession. The neighbor, no, the imposter, had envied my life, my normalcy. They had built a shadow existence, slipping into my routines, stealing my identity piece by piece. But they didn't want to hurt me. They wanted to become me. To erase the real me and take my place. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This person wasn't just a threat, they were a mirror, reflecting my own neglect and complacency. But I refused to be erased. "I'm calling the police," I said firmly, reaching for my phone. They laughed softly, shaking their head. "You don't have to. You've already lost." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I took a step forward, the metal piece raised. "No. I'm taking back my life." The neighbor hesitated, then lunged. The struggle was brief but intense, the small weapon connecting with a sharp crack. They stumbled back, clutching their arm, their face contorted with shock and pain. That was when I heard the sirens, distant but growing louder. Someone must have seen the door forced open, the commotion. Relief washed over me like a tide. The police arrived moments later, their presence anchoring the chaos. I told them everything, the missing items, the shadow life, the confrontation. They arrested the neighbor without resistance, their eyes hollow and resigned. In the days that followed, the apartment felt heavy with silence. I changed the locks, installed new security cameras, and slowly began to reclaim my space. The trauma lingered, a shadow that refused to lift, but I was no longer afraid. I started therapy, talking through the violation, the fear, the loss of trust. It wasn't easy, but each session peeled back layers of numbness, revealing a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I reconnected with old friends, opened myself to vulnerability, and learned to listen to myself, to others. Most importantly, I learned to pay attention. To not let the small things slip by unnoticed. Because sometimes, the quietest threats come from the ones who live in your shadow. Standing by the window one evening, watching the neighborhood settle into dusk, I felt a fragile peace. The neighbor's apartment was empty now, a silent reminder of what had been stolen and reclaimed. I was still here. I was still me. And that was enough. The night deepened, and with it, a newfound clarity settled within me. Shadows lengthened, but they no longer felt menacing. Instead, they seemed like old friends, reminding me of the battles fought and the resilience earned. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, I was anchored, rooted in the quiet strength that only survival can teach. I turned away from the window, ready to face whatever came next, carrying the lessons of the past like a shield forged in silence. The room breathed with calm, and I let myself finally rest. Story 6, Relentless Tale, stalked on a deserted road. The road was empty, the way it usually was this late on a Tuesday. It was the kind of drive I'd made 1,000 times before, familiar, uneventful, the kind that let my mind wander freely. I thought about dinner plans, the stack of unopened mail on the kitchen counter, the dog waiting to be let outside. I was halfway home, maybe 10 minutes out from the edge of town, when I noticed the car behind me. At first, it was just a glint in my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights that seemed to hang a little too close. I glanced over my shoulder, saw the silhouette of a sedan, dark, unremarkable, no flashing lights or anything to suggest emergency or law enforcement. Just a car, following. I figured it would pass me soon enough. The road curved gently to the left, then right, a lazy S-shape that wound through the trees. But the car stayed behind me, matching my every turn with an almost mechanical precision. At every bend, the headlights followed, never wavering, never fading. It was a little unsettling, but I told myself it was probably someone heading home the same way, or maybe just lost and unsure of the route. I adjusted my speed slightly, nothing dramatic, just a gentle tap on the brake pedal as I slowed for one of the sharper corners. The car behind me did the same, braking in perfect sync. My heart nudged at the edges of my ribs, an instinctual warning I didn't entirely understand. I tried to shake it off. Maybe they were just cautious, or maybe they were watching a deer or something in the ditch. I told myself that, but the feeling didn't go away. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. No streetlights, no houses. Just me, the car behind, and the whisper of my tires against the asphalt. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 7:42 p.m. I wasn't sure whether to feel grateful that I was close to home or frustrated that this stranger was tailing me with such unnerving consistency. I decided to test it. I took a sharp left onto a side road I knew well. It was narrower, bordered by thick woods. The kind of road that dead-ended at a small gravel driveway, the kind that felt claustrophobic even in daylight. The car followed, the headlights swinging along the bend in perfect imitation. I counted 2, 3 seconds after I'd slowed, and then the car did the same. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I considered turning around, but the thought of driving back along those empty roads, with that car still behind me, didn't appeal. I thought about pulling over, but there wasn't much shoulder, just the gravel and a steep embankment dropping into the dark woods. I kept going, hoping the driver would get bored or take a different route. But at the next right turn, the same thing happened. The car was there. Always there. The headlights were bright, but not blinding, just enough to make me squint to feel watched. I tried not to look too long, but my eyes kept flicking back, catching the dim outline of the vehicle, the way it maintained exactly the same distance, never closing the gap, never falling behind. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But the knot in my stomach tightened, and I found my thoughts drifting to worst-case scenarios I usually reserved for true emergencies. Had I done something to attract attention? Was this someone I knew? Someone I didn't want to see? The questions churned in my mind like stones in a river. After another mile, I finally pulled over onto a wider patch of gravel near a thick stand of pines. I killed the engine, the sudden silence thick and unnatural. The headlights behind me stayed on, fixed like a pair of watchful eyes. I sat there, the car's glow spilling over the dark trees, waiting, heart hammering a little too loud. I reached for my phone to call the police, or at least to check the time again, but the screen stayed black. Battery dead. I'd forgotten to plug it in during the day. A cold shiver ran down my spine. And then, without a sound, the passenger window of the car behind me rolled down. I stared, mouth dry, breath catching in my throat. The window slid down smoothly, as if someone had pressed a button. But the interior remained shadowed, the driver unseen. For a moment, nothing moved except the leaves trembling in a sudden breeze. Then a faint, low voice came through the open window, too quiet to make out, but unmistakably human. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, the car that had followed me this far, or the silence that stretched between us now, heavy with expectation. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing for a way out. But I was still frozen in place, caught between the empty road and the dark car that waited behind me, its window down like an invitation or a warning. And I had no idea what would happen next. The engine idled softly, a low hum blending with the distant rustle of leaves. Then, a figure stepped into the dim light, a man, his face obscured by shadows, but his eyes sharp and calculating. Without a word, he reached into the car, unlocking my door with a cold precision that sent a chill down my spine. I forced myself to move, heart pounding in sync with the fading daylight. The door creaked open, revealing a glimpse of something I couldn't yet understand, danger or salvation, or both. The sharp click of the lock disengaging echoed through the still night air, louder than it should have been in the quiet gravel lot. I swallowed hard and forced myself to glance at him. He was average height, maybe early 30s, dressed in a dark jacket that blended with the night. His eyes caught the light for a moment. They were calm, calculating, but not immediately hostile. Still, that didn't ease the knot in my gut. Something about the way he moved, deliberate and slow, made my skin crawl. "I'm not sure what you want," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "Why are you following me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, just out of reach, and I noticed a faint smell of cigarette smoke and something metallic, oil, maybe, or cold sweat. His eyes scanned my face, then shifted to the empty road behind me, as if checking for something or someone else. "Look," he finally said, voice low, almost a whisper. "I don't want trouble." That felt like a lie, but I nodded cautiously. "Okay. Then why are you here?" He hesitated, then glanced down briefly before looking back at me. "You don't know what you're mixed up in. That car, following you, it's not random." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Who sent you?" He shook his head slowly. "No one sent me." "Not exactly. I'm here because I'm worried." That was the last thing I expected to hear. "Worried? About me?" He nodded once. "Yeah. You're being watched. Not just tonight, this has been going on for a while. I've seen the car before. It's been hanging around you, on and off, for weeks." Weeks. I felt a cold finger press against my spine. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because I wasn't sure you believed me," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Or that you'd want to listen." I swallowed again, trying to process it all. "Who are you?" He hesitated, then gave me a tight smile. "Call me Tom. I'm someone who's been paying attention." Before I could ask more, a sudden flash of headlights swept across the trees behind him. A second car, distant but unmistakable, appeared momentarily before disappearing down the road. Tom's eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "They're out there," he said quietly. "Watching. Waiting." I glanced over my shoulder, heart pounding. The road behind us was empty again, but the feeling of eyes on my back didn't fade. I realized then how vulnerable I was, stranded in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who might be the only person trying to help or the first step into something far worse. "Why me?" I asked. "Why are they watching me?" Tom looked away, jaw tight. "Because you stumbled onto something you weren't supposed to see. Something dangerous." My mind raced back to the strange errands I'd run earlier that day, the unfamiliar faces at the grocery store, the odd glances from the cashier. Had I really been that oblivious? What did I see? I pressed. Tom shook his head. "I don't know exactly. But whoever's behind this doesn't want you digging around. They're careful, but sloppy enough to leave traces. I've been trying to piece it together." I swallowed, trying to steady myself. "What do you want me to do?" He glanced around, then leaned closer, voice dropping. "You need to keep moving, keep looking. But be smart. Don't trust anyone. And if you see that car again, don't stop. Just keep driving until it's gone." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over me like a shroud. The night seemed darker somehow, the trees closing in tighter. And through it all, the dead phone in my lap was a silent reminder that I was cut off, no help coming. Tom straightened, eyes sharp again. "I'll watch your back as best I can. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Before I could respond, a sudden noise broke the tension, a soft thud against the back of my car. We both turned sharply. From the shadows, a small package lay on the gravel, wrapped in plain brown paper, edges taped haphazardly. No note. No explanation. Tom's eyes darkened. "They're sending a message." I swallowed hard, heart hammering. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to know what it meant. But I knew one thing for certain: whatever this was, it was only just beginning. Tom crouched cautiously, scanning the perimeter as he reached for the package. "Stay back," he warned, his voice low but firm. I stepped aside, every instinct screaming to run, but rooted to the spot by a mix of dread and curiosity. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he carefully peeled back the tape, the paper crackling louder than it should in the still night. Inside, a small, weathered notebook rested, its edges frayed and stained. Tom flipped it open, revealing pages filled with dens, cramped handwriting, notes, dates, names. Some words were circled, others crossed out erratically. His brow furrowed deeper as he scanned the contents. "Looks like a journal, or some kind of log," he muttered. "This could tie everything together." I leaned in, heart pounding faster. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken threats. Whoever had left this wanted us to follow the trail, to dig deeper. But how far down did this rabbit hole go? Tom snapped the notebook shut and met my eyes. "We need to move. Now, before they realize we have it." I nodded, the weight of the unknown settling over us as we disappeared into the shadows, the night swallowing our footsteps. The night had folded itself into an even thicker cloak of silence by the time we got back in the car. Tom was in the passenger seat, the low hum of the engine filling the space between us, but neither of us spoke. The back road stretched ahead, a tangle of shadows and moonlight, and with every mile, the oppressive feeling grew heavier. The notebook rested on my lap, its rough edges digging into my jeans like a physical reminder of the danger we were swimming in. "Think they know we have it?" I finally asked, voice low. Tom's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, the faint gleam of headlights far behind us. "They must. Otherwise, why leave it where we could find it? It's bait, or maybe a warning." I swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in my mouth. The thought of someone watching our every move was unsettling, but the idea that they wanted us to follow this trail was worse. Whoever they were, they weren't bluffing. Not by a long shot. We drove on in silence, the notebook open between us now, Tom tracing lines of ink with a finger as he tried to decipher the chaotic script. Names and dates jumped out, some familiar, others cryptic. One name in particular kept recurring, circled in red ink: Evelyn Harper. I hadn't heard that name before, but Tom's reaction told me it meant something. "Who's Evelyn Harper?" I asked, leaning closer. Tom's face darkened. I checked the local records back in town. She disappeared 10 years ago, no trace. People assumed she ran off or met with foul play, but nothing was ever proven. A chill ran down my spine. The notebook wasn't just a random diary, it was evidence of something deeper, something dangerous. And now we were tangled in it. Suddenly, the headlights behind us flickered, disappearing for a moment before reappearing just a few seconds later. My heart jumped. "That car again," I whispered. Tom nodded grimly. "They're following. And they're not going to let this go." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The headlights stayed steady, unwavering, like a predator locked on its prey. Every turn we took, every time I slowed or braked, the car mirrored us flawlessly, never losing ground. Maybe we should pull over, I said, voice shaky. Confront them. Tom hesitated, then nodded. Might be our only chance to get some answers. I found a white spot along the shoulder, heart hammering as I eased the car to a stop. The other vehicle rolled up behind us, engine idling. The air between us thickened, heavy with threat. I reached for my phone, only to find it dead, completely drained. No signal, no life. Just black silence. Tom cursed under his breath. Figures. Before I could think to say anything, the passenger window on the other car began to roll down, slowly, as if controlled by an unseen hand. A cold breeze swept through the open window, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and something else, something metallic and sharp. I locked my doors instinctively, eyes fixed on the figure behind the wheel. A man emerged from the shadows, face obscured by the dim light, but his presence was unmistakably hostile. Looking for this, he said, voice low and dangerous, holding up a small, worn leather wallet. My breath caught. That wasn't just any wallet, it was mine. I had lost it months ago, months before all this started. Tom's hand moved to his side, fingers brushing the grip of the small knife he carried. Who are you? He demanded. The man smiled, a thin, cruel smile. Someone who's been waiting a long time. You have something that belongs to me. I glanced down at the notebook on my lap, the pages suddenly feeling heavier than ever. Whatever we had stumbled onto, it had just turned from a mystery into a threat with a face. The man's eyes locked onto mine through the windshield, and in that moment, I realized there was no turning back. We were in deeper than we ever imagined, and this night was far from over. The window finished rolling down with a soft click. He reached out, fingers tapping the roof of my car, slow and deliberate. Hand it over. The book. Now! Tom's grip tightened on his knife, but I shook my head, heart pounding louder than the engine. Not until you tell us what this is about. The man's smile faded, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. You should have kept driving, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Now, you're both going to regret stopping. And with that, the headlights flared brighter, the engine revving as the man's car lurched forward, blocking the road ahead. I slammed my foot on the brake, the tires screeching against the gravel. Tom grabbed the notebook, clutching it like a lifeline. The road was dead ahead, but so was he, and the night was closing in fast. We were trapped. The air grew thick with tension, each second stretching impossibly long. I glanced at Tom, his hands trembled, eyes wide with fear but resolute. The man stepped out, shadows swallowing half his face, his smile thin and cruel. Hand it over, he demanded, voice low and menacing. Desperation surged through me, but surrender wasn't an option, not when everything depended on that notebook. I tightened my grip, preparing for whatever came next. The man's footsteps crunched over the gravel, slow and deliberate, closing the distance between us. Look, I said, voice steady despite the knot of fear twisting in my stomach. We don't want trouble. We just want to understand what this is about. I nodded toward the notebook still clutched in Tom's hands. That book, you said it belongs to you. Why? What's in it? The man's smile flickered, as if the question caught him off guard. Maybe it was the first time he'd been asked to explain himself rather than just bark orders. Why do you think you have the right to it? His voice was low, almost a growl. You don't know what you're messing with. That book, it's not just some collection of scribbles. I swallowed hard. Then tell us. Help us understand. Maybe we can work something out. He chuckled, short, sharp, and humorless. You think I'm here to negotiate? No! You took something that's mine. And now you're going to pay. Tom shifted, knife raised. Back off, he warned. We don't want to fight, but we will if we have to. The man's gaze flicked to Tom, then back to me. For a moment, the tension wavered, as if he was weighing his options. Then, without warning, he lunged forward. Instinct took over. Tom stepped between us, slashing the air with the knife. The man stumbled back, swearing under his breath, eyes blazing. You don't know who you're dealing with, he spat. I fumbled for the door handle, ready to bolt, but the man was faster. He slammed his fist against the passenger side window, rattling the glass. Hand it over, he growled. I shook my head, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. No! Suddenly, the man's cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing down. His face twisted in fury. You've got 2 minutes, he said, voice cold. After that, this ends badly for both of you. Without another word, he turned and stalked back to his car, sliding behind the wheel. The headlights cut through the dark as the engine roared to life. He revved the gas, then pulled back onto the road, headlights locked on us like a predator's gaze. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Tom exhaled sharply. We can't stay here, he said. If he wants that book, he's not going to stop. I nodded, clutching the notebook to my chest. We need a plan. And fast. We scrambled back into the car, doors slamming shut behind us. I started the engine, but the road ahead was still blocked by the other vehicle. The man's headlights didn't blink, didn't waver. Reverse, Tom urged. Find a side road. We need to lose him. I complied, shifting the car into reverse, tires skidding slightly on the gravel. The man's car followed, narrowing every move. Every turn. Every brake. His headlights stayed fixed on me, never fading. Minutes passed like hours. Our breaths came out in ragged gasps. I stole glances at Tom. His face was pale, sweat beading at his temple. The knife lay on the passenger seat, useless without the space to swing it. Then, as I took a sharp left, the man's car suddenly accelerated, headlights blinding. He blocked the road ahead again, forcing us to a halt. I slammed my foot on the brake, heart pounding. The man's window rolled down slowly, mechanically, as if by some cruel design. My phone buzzed briefly on the dashboard, then died, screen flickering out. No signal, I muttered, panic rising. No way to call for help. No way to warn anyone. The passenger window on his car slid down further, revealing a face half hidden in shadow. The man's eyes locked onto mine, cold and unyielding. His hand reached out, tapping the roof of my car again, slow, deliberate. Hand over the book, he said. Now! Tom's hand hovered over his knife, ready to strike, but I shook my head. Not until you tell us who you are. Why you want this so badly. The man's smile was thin and cruel. Names don't matter. What matters is what you have. And what you don't realize is how dangerous that is. Before I could respond, headlights from another car appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. The man's eyes flicked toward the approaching vehicle, then back to us. Looks like our time's up, he said, voice low. A moment later, the other car slowed, headlights illuminating the scene, two strangers caught in a standoff on an empty back road. The man's gaze hardened. You're not safe. Not yet. The window rolled up with a sharp click, engine revving as the car lurched forward, disappearing into the shadows. I exhaled shakily, heart still racing. Tom looked at me, eyes wide. Who was that? He asked. I had no answer. But one thing was clear, this was far from over. And whatever was in that notebook, it was more dangerous than we ever imagined. The other car pulled up beside us, headlights shining bright. The driver's door opened slowly, footsteps crunching on the gravel. I grabbed the notebook tighter, bracing myself for what came next. The figure stepped into the light, face obscured by a hood. "You don't know what you're messing with," a low voice warned. Tom swallowed hard, backing away. I clenched my jaw, determination hardening inside me. This was a game of shadows, and I intended to win. The figure's eyes glinted beneath the hood, sharp and unblinking. "That notebook holds more than just scribbles," they said, voice edged with something like regret. "It's a key. And once it's out, there's no turning back." Tom's breathing quickened. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of the stranger's mouth. "I'm here to make sure you don't make the same mistake others did. You think you're uncovering secrets, but some truths are meant to stay buried." I took a slow step forward, ignoring the pounding in my chest. "If we don't find out what's in this notebook, people will keep disappearing. We owe it to them and ourselves." The figure hesitated, then reached into their pocket, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. "This is all the warning you're getting. After tonight, things will change. Be ready." Before we could respond, the figure slipped back into the shadows and vanished, leaving only the echo of their footsteps behind. The night felt colder, heavier somehow, as if the darkness itself was watching and waiting. The morning light came in pale, hesitant streaks, barely penetrating the gloom that had settled over me since last night. I hadn't slept. Not really. My mind kept circling back to the figure's words, their warning, the folded paper. What did it mean? Change. After tonight, things would change. But how? And who else was involved? More importantly, who could we trust? Tom set 2 mugs down with a soft clink. "You look like hell," he said, attempting a small smile. "Thanks," I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "You? Not great." He hesitated, then added, "But at least we're still here." The notebook felt heavier now, as if the weight of what it contained had settled onto my shoulders rather than just the pages. I flipped it closed and looked at Tom. "We need to figure out what's next." He nodded. "We should tell someone. The police, maybe." I shook my head. "They won't believe us. And if this is as dangerous as that guy said, involving the police could make everything worse." Tom's jaw tightened. "So what? We just keep digging alone? Waiting for someone else to disappear?" I didn't have an answer. I understood his frustration, but fear was a sharper edge in me now. The notebook wasn't just a collection of notes or rumors, it was a key to a hidden, messy truth. Something people had died trying to protect or expose. We had stepped into something far bigger than we realized. That afternoon, I went back through the notebook's pages, scanning the scattered entries for patterns, names, anything that might give us leverage. The scribbles were chaotic at first, but as the pages progressed, a sharper narrative emerged. Locations, dates, descriptions of people who had vanished, and cryptic references to a ring of individuals using the back roads as their hunting ground. The more I read, the more I understood how carefully this had been hidden. Tom sat beside me, occasionally pointing out connections, his earlier skepticism replaced by shared urgency. We had to act, but cautiously. Late that evening, I sat on the porch, the notebook closed beside me. The folded paper was still unopened in my jacket pocket. I knew what I had to do, but dreaded the confrontation. Someone wanted us to stop, to back away from the truth. But I couldn't. Not anymore. After a long breath, I unfolded the paper. It was a single address, scrawled in neat handwriting, with a time, 10 p.m. tonight. No name, no explanation, just an invitation, or a challenge. "Are you sure about this?" Tom asked, standing behind me. I looked up, meeting his eyes. "No. But if we don't go, they win." He nodded slowly, the weight of it settling between us. We prepared for the night, taking nothing but the notebook, my phone fully charged this time, and a small flashlight. The drive was quiet, tension thick in the car. The back road stretched out like twisted veins under the moonlight, empty and silent except for the hum of the engine. When we arrived, the address was an old, run-down farmhouse, its windows dark, the air thick with neglect. We stepped out cautiously. The door creaked open before we could knock. A figure stood there, middle-aged, wearing a work jacket and a tired expression. "You're brave or foolish to come," the man said, voice low but steady. "I'm the one who left the note." I held the notebook up. "We need to know what's going on. Why the disappearances? Who's behind this?" He sighed and stepped aside to let us in. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and dust, but there was a sense of safety in the dim light, a human presence that calmed my racing heart. "My name's Henry," he said, settling at the kitchen table. "I used to be part of this. I was young, reckless. What you found, it's the ledger of a group that's been controlling this area for years, people who prey on travelers, who make the back roads unsafe." I left when I realized how far it had gone. Tom's eyes narrowed. "Why tell us now? Why risk it?" "Because you're different," Henry said. "You're not here to exploit or silence. You want to stop it." He explained how the group operated in secret, how they used fear and isolation to keep control. The notebook was his attempt to document their crimes, to build a case. But he'd been too afraid to act. Until now. We spent hours piecing together what Henry knew, mapping out the network of roads, the safe houses, the people who could help. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to bring to the authorities if we could trust them. The next day, with Henry's guidance, Tom and I made the call. We met with a detective who listened carefully, took notes, and promised to investigate quietly. It was the first real step toward justice. As the days passed, the sense of being hunted slowly waned. The notebook's pages no longer felt like a curse but a tool, a means to expose and dismantle the darkness hidden in plain sight. Tom and I talked more openly, the tension between us easing. We had been thrown into a nightmare together, but we were coming out stronger, more aware of the fragility of safety and the courage it takes to face the unknown. One evening, I stood on the porch again, the sky a deepening violet. The notebook was safely stored away. I breathed in the cool air, feeling the weight of what we'd survived and the hope of what we might change. Fear hadn't disappeared, it never would, but it no longer ruled me. I had learned to confront it, to push through the shadows, and to hold on to light, however faint. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough.